Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Thomas Davis, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the summer of 2023, during what was supposed to be a rejuvenating week-long hiking trip in the Trinity Alps wilderness in Northern California. I'd planned the trip for months. After my divorce and the subsequent reassessment of pretty much everything in my life, I needed to get away. My therapist had encouraged reconnecting with nature as a way to process grief, so I took her advice perhaps more literally than she intended. I would go alone, just me, my gear, and the wilderness for 7 days. The Trinity Alps are breathtaking, jagged granite peaks, alpine meadows, and forests so dense the sunlight filters through in ethereal rays. They're also remote enough that cell service is a distant memory, and you can hike for days without seeing another human being. That isolation was exactly what I wanted. I parked at the Stewart Fork trailhead near Trinity Center. The ranger at the station, a weathered man in his 60s named Greg, checked my permit and supplies with practiced efficiency. "You hiking alone?" he asked, eyebrows raised slightly. "Yeah," I replied, shouldering my pack. "Need to clear my head." Greg nodded slowly. "Well, stick to your trail plan. These mountains have a way of confusing folks who wander off." He tapped my permit. "And if you hear anything strange at night, just stay in your tent." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Like what, bears?" His expression didn't change. "Bears make sense," he said cryptically. "Some sounds out there don't." I chalked it up to the usual ranger talk designed to keep tourists from doing anything stupid. I thanked him and headed up the trail, eager to start my journey into solitude. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. I hiked through ancient forests and along crystal-clear streams, making good time to Emerald Lake where I set up camp the second night. The stars were unbelievable, a glittering tapestry unmarred by light pollution. For the first time in months, I felt the knot in my chest begin to loosen. On the third day, I decided to push further into the wilderness than my original plan, heading toward Granite Lake. The terrain became more challenging, the trail less defined. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds began gathering over the peaks. The temperature dropped and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. I needed to find shelter before the storm hit. My map showed an old Forest Service cabin about a mile off trail. It wasn't part of my permit area, but given the approaching weather, I figured the rangers would understand. I turned east, using my compass to navigate through increasingly dense forest. The first drops of rain hit as the trees began to thin, revealing a small clearing. In the center stood the cabin, a simple, weathered structure with a sagging porch and boarded windows. It looked abandoned, but it would keep me dry. The door creaked open at my touch. Inside, dust motes swirled in the gray light filtering through cracks in the boards. The cabin was a single room with a stone fireplace, an old metal frame bed with a bare mattress, and a small table with 2 chairs. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust except for the floor, which showed recent footprints. Someone had been here. Recently. A rational voice in my head suggested other hikers had sought shelter, just as I was doing. But something about the footprints seemed wrong. They were barefoot, for one thing, and they didn't move in logical patterns. They crisscrossed the room, sometimes overlapping, as if someone had been pacing frantically or dancing. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the roof. Thunder rolled across the mountains. I had no choice but to stay, at least until the storm passed. I dropped my pack and swept the dust from the table and one chair. From my supplies, I laid out some beef jerky, trail mix, and a protein bar. A meager dinner, but it would do. As I ate, I studied the cabin more carefully. The walls were bare except for a single black and white photograph in a simple wooden frame. It showed a family, A stern-looking man, a woman with sad eyes, and 3 children, standing in front of this very cabin, though it looked much newer in the photo. Judging from their clothing, the picture had been taken in the 1930s or 40s. I walked over to examine it more closely. Someone had scratched over the faces of 2 of the children with what looked like a knife or sharp stone. Only the youngest child's face remained untouched, a girl of about 6 with long braids and a solemn expression. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the rain-cooled air. Who would do something like that? And why? Night fell quickly, hastened by the storm clouds. I lit my camping lantern and gathered wood from a stack on the porch to start a fire. As the flames caught and grew, I began to feel a bit better. Fire has a way of pushing back the darkness, both outside and in. I was arranging my sleeping bag on the bed when I first heard it, a soft humming coming from outside, barely audible over the rain. A melody I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. I froze, listening. The humming stopped. "Hello?" I called out, moving to the window. I pried away one of the boards to peer into the darkness but could see nothing beyond the reflection of my own tense face. Then the humming started again, closer this time, as if right outside the wall where I stood. A child's voice singing a simple, eerie tune. I dropped the board back into place and backed away, heart hammering in my chest. "Is someone there?" I called again, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have plenty of supplies if you need help." Silence answered me, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. I told myself it was just the wind in the trees, or water running through the stones outside, natural sounds distorted by my isolation and the strange surroundings. I was tired from hiking, and my mind was playing tricks. Still, I double-checked that the door was securely latched before returning to the bed. I left the lantern on and fed another log to the fire. Sleep came reluctantly, in fitful bursts interrupted by the storm and strange dreams. I dreamt of children playing in the forest, their laughter turning to screams. I dreamt of the little girl from the photograph, standing by my bed, her solemn eyes now black holes that seemed to pull me in. I dreamt of being lost in a forest where the trees whispered with human voices. I jolted awake at dawn, drenched in cold sweat. The fire had died to embers, and the rain had stopped. Watery sunlight filtered through the boarded windows, illuminating the cabin in a pale glow. Something was different. It took my sleep-fogged brain a moment to realize what. The photograph on the wall had changed. Now, all 3 children's faces had been scratched out. I jumped from the bed, grabbing my knife from my pack. I was alone in the cabin. I would have woken if someone had entered, but I still checked every corner, even looking under the bed like a child afraid of monsters. Nothing. No one. My hands shook as I packed my gear. I needed to get back to the main trail, back to where other hikers might be found. I'd had enough solitude. As I slung my pack over my shoulders, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, knife raised. A small, dirty footprint appeared in the dust, as if pressed by an invisible foot. Then another, and another, moving across the floor toward me. I ran, burst through the door into the clearing, not looking back until I was among the trees. Only then did I turn to see if I was being followed. The cabin stood silent in the morning light. On the porch stood a small figure. The girl from the photograph, her long braids moving slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. Her face was indistinct at this distance, but I could feel her eyes on me. Then she flickered like an image on a failing screen, and was gone. I ran until my lungs burned, crashing through underbrush, not caring about the trail or direction. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I had no idea where I was. The forest around me was unfamiliar, denser, older-looking somehow. The trees grew so close together that in places their trunks seemed to merge, creating grotesque, almost human-like forms. I pulled out my map and compass with trembling hands. According to the compass, I was heading west, which should eventually bring me back to the main trail. But the terrain didn't match what the map showed for this area. Where the map indicated a gentle slope, I found myself in a steep-sided ravine. Where there should have been a stream, there was only dry ground. I was lost. The rational part of my brain took over. I had supplies, skills, and daylight. I would find my way back. I just needed to keep a clear head. I chose a direction and walked steadily, marking trees as I passed. The forest remained eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the sound of my own breathing and footsteps. After about an hour, I came to a small clearing with a familiar feeling. Too familiar. In the center stood the cabin I had fled. Impossible. I had run west, away from it, and had continued in that direction. I checked my compass again. The needle spun wildly, then settled, pointing directly at the cabin. A high, childish laugh echoed from the trees behind me. I whirled around. Nothing. Just shadows and silence. "Who's there?" I shouted. "What do you want?" My voice sounded small in the vast silence of the forest. A breeze stirred the leaves overhead, sending dappled sunlight dancing across the ground. For a moment, the patterns of light and shadow seemed to form a figure. A small girl with long braids reaching out a hand toward me. I blinked, and the image dissolved. "This isn't happening," I told myself. "You're having a breakdown. Stress, isolation, maybe something you ate. This isn't real." But the cabin was real. The footprints had been real. And the fear churning my stomach and sending my heart into overdrive was definitely real. I approached the cabin cautiously, one hand on my knife. If I couldn't get away from it, maybe there was something inside I needed to find. Something that would end whatever was happening. The door swung open at my touch, just as it had the day before. Everything was as I had left it, except for one thing. The photograph on the wall was gone. In its place was a child's drawing, done in what looked like charcoal. It showed 3 stick figures lying on the ground and one standing, holding what appeared to be a knife. Below it, in a childish scrawl, were the words, "They made me do it." My blood ran cold. Ran. I backed toward the door, unwilling to take my eyes off the drawing. My back hit something solid that shouldn't have been there. The door had swung shut behind me. I spun around and yanked on the handle. It didn't budge. I pulled harder, throwing my weight against it. Nothing. "Let me out," I shouted, pounding on the door. "Please! You shouldn't have come back, mister." The voice came from behind me. A child's voice, but somehow old, as if filtering through layers of time. I turned slowly. The girl from the photograph stood by the fireplace. She looked solid, real, though her clothing was old-fashioned. A simple dress that reached her knees. Worn leather shoes, those long braids I had noticed in the photo. But her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too knowing for a child. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Eleanor," she said, her head tilting at an angle that seemed just slightly inhuman. "This was my daddy's cabin." What happened here?" "Eleanor." Her face darkened. "Bad things. Daddy had bad dreams. Said voices told him what to do." Her small hand reached up to touch her neck where I now noticed a thin, dark line. "He said we were tainted. That the forest showed him the truth." Horror washed over me as I understood what she was telling me. "But I didn't die," she continued, her voice now a sing-song that raised the hair on my arms. "The forest kept me, and I kept the forest." She took a step toward me, and the air around her seemed to distort, like heat waves off hot asphalt. For a moment, I saw her as she truly was. Not a little girl at all, but something ancient and hungry, wearing the memory of a child like a poorly fitting mask. "You're alone," she said, and it wasn't a question. "No one knows you're here. No one will look for you." "People are expecting me," I lied, my voice cracking. "I'm supposed to check in at the ranger station tomorrow." Eleanor smiled, showing teeth that were suddenly too sharp, too numerous. "Everyone lies when they're scared," she said. "The others did too." "Others?" She gestured to the floor. The dust was shifting, revealing more footprints. Dozens of them, of different sizes, crisscrossing the room. Men's boots, women's smaller prints, even children's. All appearing as if stamped into the dust by invisible feet. "The forest gets lonely," Eleanor said, taking another step toward me. "But I find friends. They stay for a while." I lunged for the window, tearing at the boards with desperate strength. One came loose in my hands and I smashed it against the frame to widen the opening. Outside I could see the clearing, the trees beyond. Freedom. "They never leave," Eleanor whispered suddenly right behind me. Not really. I threw myself through the window, feeling glass and wood tear at my clothes and skin. I hit the ground hard, but adrenaline had me on my feet and running before the pain even registered. Behind me, Eleanor's laughter rose, changing from a child's giggle to something inhuman that seemed to come from the trees themselves. The sound followed me as I ran, always just behind, sometimes seeming to come from ahead. The forest blurred around me. Branches reached for me like grasping hands. Roots rose from the ground to trip me. More than once I fell, only to look up and see faces in the bark of trees. Human faces frozen in expressions of terror. I ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed on the forest floor, lungs burning, vision sparking with black dots. As consciousness faded, I heard Eleanor's voice one last time. "Rest now," she crooned. "We have forever." I woke to a different sound, a dog barking and a man's voice calling commands. Rough hands rolled me over and I found myself looking up at a bearded face beneath a ranger's hat. "Easy there, buddy," the man said. "You're pretty banged up." Reality came back in pieces. I was lying on a trail, the main trail, judging by its width and well-maintained surface. The ranger knelt beside me while a German shepherd in a search and rescue vest sniffed curiously at my pack. "Greg, at the station, reported you missing when you didn't come back on schedule," the ranger explained as he checked me for injuries. "I'm Dave. This is Rex. He found you." I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. Dave held a water bottle to my lips and I drank gratefully. "The cabin," I managed finally. "The girl—" Dave's expression grew cautious. "What cabin?" "Off trail, east of Granite Lake." My voice sounded strange in my own ears. "Old Forest Service cabin." Dave shook his head slowly. "There's no cabin in that area," he said. "Not for at least 50 years. But I stayed there. During the storm." "What storm?" "Weather's been clear for days." I stared at him, then at the cloudless sky visible through the canopy above. "How long was I missing?" "Just overnight. Your permit had you coming back yesterday." That was impossible. I had spent at least 2 days hiking in, another in the cabin, and then— how long had I been running? It felt like hours, maybe an entire day. Dave helped me to my feet. I was unsteady but could walk with his support. My clothes were torn and dirty, my hands and face scratched as if I'd run through thorns. My pack was with me, though I had no memory of keeping it during my flight through the forest. As Dave guided me down the trail toward the trailhead, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had I hallucinated the whole thing? Some kind of stress-induced break with reality? "You know," Dave said conversationally as we walked, "you're not the first hiker we've found disoriented in these parts. Something about these mountains messes with people's heads sometimes, makes them see things." I nodded, latching onto this rational explanation like a lifeline. There was a family. "Back in the 30s, he continued. "Father went crazy, killed his wife and 2 of the kids. Third one, little girl, was never found." My blood ran cold. "Some of the old-timers say she's still out there," Dave said, seemingly oblivious to my reaction. "Luring hikers off the trails, but that's just campfire stories, you know?" We reached a bend in the trail and he pointed ahead. "Trailhead's just another half-mile. You think you can make it?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good man. Rex and I need to finish our patrol. There's another hiker missing. Young woman, solo backpacker. Been gone 3 days now." As Dave turned to go, a glint of something caught my eye. A small object was caught in the search dog's vest, something that looked like an old metal button, the kind that might have come from a child's dress from the 1930s. "Wait," I called, but Dave and Rex were already moving away up the trail, quickly disappearing around a bend. I made my way back to the trailhead alone, constantly fighting the urge to look over my shoulder. At the ranger station, Greg seemed surprised to see me. "You found your own way back?" he asked. "Dave radioed that he'd found you, but you were in pretty bad shape." "Dave," I repeated. "Ranger Dave with the German Shepherd?" Greg's face went slack. "We don't have a Ranger Dave," he said slowly, "and we haven't used search dogs since the budget cuts 3 years ago." I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Greg reached for the radio on his belt, his eyes never leaving my face. "And nobody radioed in about finding you," he added. "We've had search parties looking since yesterday, but no reports." The static of the radio filled the small station office as Greg called in, reporting my return and canceling the search. As he spoke, his eyes drifted to something behind me, and his face paled. I turned to follow his gaze. Through the window, at the edge of the forest that bordered the station, stood a small figure with long braids. She raised a hand in greeting, then stepped backward into the shadows of the trees, disappearing from sight. "Who's that little girl?" Greg asked, his voice tight. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Greg insisted I go to the hospital in Weaverville, even drove me there himself. The doctors found nothing physically wrong with me beyond dehydration, exhaustion, and superficial scratches. They suggested I might have experienced a stress-induced hallucination or fugue state, exacerbated by the isolation of solo hiking. I nodded and accepted their explanations, their prescriptions for rest and therapy. What else could I do? I've never gone back to the Trinity Alps. I've never gone hiking alone again. In fact, I rarely leave my apartment in the city now, where the constant noise of traffic and neighbors is a comfort, a reminder that I'm never truly alone. But sometimes when it rains at night, I think I hear humming, a child's voice singing a simple, eerie tune. And in the water stains on my ceiling, I sometimes see a pattern that looks like a small handprint. I keep the lights on when this happens. I turn the television up loud, and I remind myself that it was all in my head, a breakdown brought on by stress and grief and isolation. But I've been checking the missing persons reports for Northern California regularly. The young woman Dave mentioned, the solo backpacker, she was never found. And every few months, like clockwork, another hiker goes missing in the Trinity Alps. They find some of them eventually, wandering the trails with no memory of where they've been. Others are never seen again. I know where they are, though. They're with Eleanor. They're keeping her company in a cabin that no longer exists, leaving footprints in the dust that continue to multiply as the forest claims more friends. Because some forests are hungry, and the things that live in them are hungrier still. If you're planning a hiking trip in Northern California, stay on the trails. And if you hear humming in the forest when you make camp at night, pack up and leave. No matter how dark it is, no matter how tired you might be, because Eleanor is always looking for new friends, and the forest makes sure they never leave. My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the summer of 2024, during what was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway to Trinity Alps Wilderness in Northern California. After my divorce, I needed to escape the suffocating routine of my life in Sacramento. My therapist had suggested I try solo camping to reconnect with myself, whatever that meant. I'd always been the cautious type, the one who planned everything meticulously and never took risks. Maybe that's why Mark left. "You're suffocating me with your anxiety," he'd said on his way out. So I decided to prove something. To him, to myself, I'm not sure anymore. I chose Trinity Alps because it seemed remote enough to feel like an accomplishment, but still had established trails and campsites. I wasn't completely reckless. The area around Caribou Lake was supposed to be breathtaking, with the jagged granite peaks surrounding crystal-clear waters. Online forums described it as challenging but rewarding, perfect for what I needed. The drive from Sacramento took longer than expected. By the time I reached the trailhead at Canyon Creek, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the dense pine forest. A strange stillness hung in the air as I parked my car at the small lot near the Trinity Alps wilderness boundary. No other vehicles were present, which struck me as odd for a Friday in July, but I figured it was my lucky day. As I shouldered my backpack and checked my phone one last time, 3 bars better than I expected, an elderly man emerged from the tree line. His appearance startled me. I hadn't noticed anyone else around. "Heading up to Caribou?" he asked, his voice surprisingly strong despite his weathered appearance. "Yes," I replied, adjusting my hiking poles. "I've heard it's beautiful this time of year." He studied me with pale blue eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. "Beautiful, yes. But the lakes up there, they have a way of calling to people, especially those running from something." I felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. "I'm not running from anything," I lied, "just taking a weekend to enjoy nature." He nodded slowly, unconvinced. The Ween-Tu people called this area the place where spirits whisper. They wouldn't camp near Caribou Lake, especially not alone. He paused, then added, "Last month a fellow went up there. Game warden found his tent 2 weeks later. Empty. No signs of wildlife disturbance, no tracks leading away. Just empty." "I'm sure there's a logical explanation," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Probably hiked out a different way and didn't report it." "Could be," he conceded, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Just stay on the marked trails, and if you hear whispers after dark, cover your ears and don't answer back, no matter what they promise you." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing between the trees as suddenly as he'd appeared. I stood there for a moment, unsettled but determined not to let some local's ghost story derail my weekend. The trail started gently enough, winding through old-growth forest alongside Canyon Creek. The sound of rushing water accompanied me as I hiked, helping to quiet the anxious thoughts that had become my constant companions. About an hour in, I passed a couple heading downhill, the only other hikers I'd see that day. They nodded politely but didn't stop to chat. By dusk, I'd made it about 5 miles up the trail and decided to make camp in a small clearing near the creek. Setting up my tent alone took longer than I'd anticipated, and I found myself fumbling with the poles as daylight faded. When I finally crawled inside with my dinner, a sad pouch of rehydrated pasta, I felt a sense of accomplishment mixed with unease. The forest sounds changed as darkness fell. The cheerful birdsong gave way to the occasional hoot of an owl and the persistent chorus of crickets. Normal nighttime sounds, I reminded myself. Nothing to worry about. I must have dozed off because I woke with a start, disoriented in the pitch darkness of my tent. My watch read 2:17 a.m. Something had awakened me. A sound, a feeling. The air inside the tent felt unusually cold, my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. That's when I heard it. A soft, melodic whisper coming from just outside my tent. "Jessica." I froze, heart pounding so loudly I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. "Jessica. Come outside. I can show you where he is now." The voice was neither male nor female, but somehow both, spoken directly into my ear despite the fabric barrier between me and the outside world. The words seemed to flow like water, cool and inviting. Who was he? Mark. How would anything out here know about him? "I can give him back to you, better than before, without the cruelty, without the wandering eye. Just come outside." My hand moved toward the tent zipper without conscious thought, drawn by the hypnotic quality of the voice. At the last second, the old man's warning flashed through my mind. I jerked my hand back and clapped both palms over my ears. "Leave me alone," I whispered, squeezing my eyes shut. The temperature dropped further, my tent walls shuddering as though in a strong wind, though I could hear no rustle of leaves outside. The whispering intensified, becoming multiple voices speaking in unison, their words indistinct, but their intent clear. They wanted me outside. I don't know how long I sat there, ears covered, eyes shut, rocking back and forth. Eventually, I became aware that warmth had returned to the air, and the voices had stopped. Dawn light filtered through the nylon walls of my tent. I hadn't slept again. I should have packed up and hiked back down to my car. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But something in me, pride, stubbornness, or maybe just the need to prove I wasn't a coward, convinced me to continue upward toward Caribou Lake as planned. I told myself the voices had been a dream, a manifestation of my anxiety in an unfamiliar setting. The trail grew steeper as it climbed away from Canyon Creek, switchbacking up the side of a granite ridge. The physical exertion helped clear my mind, and by midday the previous night's terror seemed distant and ridiculous. I stopped at an overlook where the trail briefly emerged from the forest, offering a spectacular view of the surrounding wilderness, jagged peaks, verdant valleys, and in the distance, the shimmer of what might be Caribou Lake. As I stood there catching my breath, I noticed something strange on the rocky ground near the edge of the cliff, a single hiking boot, fairly new, lying on its side. I approached it cautiously and picked it up. Men's size 10, a good quality brand. It looked almost new, with barely any scuffing on the sole. What was odd was that there was no sign of its pair, nor any indication of what had happened to its owner. A sudden gust of wind nearly knocked me off balance, and for a moment, I thought I heard laughter carried on the breeze. High, childlike, but with an unsettling edge to it. I dropped the boot and backed away from the cliff edge, suddenly aware of how easy it would be to slip and fall. By late afternoon, I reached Caribou Lake. The setting was as breathtaking as promised. A pristine alpine lake nestled in a natural bowl formed by towering granite peaks. The water was so clear I could see rocks on the bottom near the shore, and its surface reflected the surrounding mountains like a perfect mirror. I found a suitable campsite on the eastern shore, far enough from the water to comply with wilderness regulations, but with a clear view of the lake. As I set up my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times I spun around expecting to find someone or something behind me, but each time I found only trees and rocks. After setting up camp, I decided to explore the lakeshore before sunset. The terrain around the lake was challenging. Large boulders interspersed with patches of hardy alpine vegetation and stunted trees shaped by harsh winter winds. About halfway around the lake, I discovered a strange arrangement of stones, a perfect circle about 6 feet in diameter, each stone placed with obvious deliberation. In the center of the circle lay a small, weathered journal, its leather cover cracked and faded. I hesitated before picking it up, remembering the boot from earlier, but curiosity won out. The first pages contained typical hiking notes, observations about trails, wildlife sightings, weather conditions. The handwriting was neat and methodical, belonging to someone named Daniel. But as I flipped through, the entries became increasingly disturbing. July 12th. The whispering started last night. At first, I thought it was the wind in the trees or water lapping at the shore, but it formed words. My name. How could anything out here know my name? July 13th. Didn't sleep. The whispers continued all night, promising to show me the truth beneath the water. I'm leaving first thing in the morning. July 14th. The trail keeps bringing me back to the lake. I've tried 3 times to follow it back down, but each time I find myself returning here. The map shows only one trail, but I swear it's changing when I'm not looking at it. July 15th. I saw someone standing in the lake tonight. A woman up to her waist in the water, staring at me. The moonlight shone through her as if she wasn't fully there. When I called out, she smiled, showing too many teeth, and sank beneath the surface. The final entry was a scrawled, frantic message that trailed off the page. July 16th. They're in the water, but they're not just in the water. They're under it, under everything, and they've been waiting so long for someone to... The journal ended there. A chill ran down my spine as I noticed the date of the final entry. Exactly 1 month ago. Was this the hiker the old man had mentioned? The one whose empty tent was found? I dropped the journal back in the center of the stone circle and backed away. The sun was setting, painting the lake surface with brilliant oranges and reds that somehow looked like fire or blood spreading across the water. I needed to get back to my campsite before darkness fell completely. That night, I didn't even pretend to try sleeping. I sat in my tent with my headlamp on, a small canister of bear spray clutched in one hand and my hiking knife in the other. Outside, the moon rose, nearly full, casting silver light across the landscape. The lake was perfectly still, not a ripple disturbing its mirror-like surface despite the occasional breeze that rustled the trees around my tent. Around midnight, the whispering began again, more insistent than before. "Jessica, we've been waiting for you. Come to the water." I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices seemed to come from inside my own head now. "We can take away the pain, the loneliness, the fear of never being enough. Just come to the water." Something scratched against the outside of my tent, not the casual brush of a tree branch, but deliberate, like fingernails dragging slowly across the nylon. I held my breath, afraid even the slightest sound would give away my position, which was ridiculous because whatever was out there clearly knew exactly where I was. The scratching stopped directly in front of the tent door. Through the thin fabric I could see a silhouette, human-shaped but wrong somehow, the proportions slightly off, the limbs too long and jointed in peculiar ways. "Jessica?" The voice was different now, normal, familiar. "Jess, is that you in there?" It was Mark's voice. My ex-husband, who was supposed to be in Seattle with his new girlfriend, was somehow here, outside my tent in the wilderness. "I got your messages," Mark's voice continued. "I'm sorry about everything. You were right all along. Can we talk? Please come out." I hadn't sent any messages. My phone hadn't had service since I'd hiked up from the trailhead. "Jess, please," the voice pleaded, perfectly mimicking Mark's tone when he wanted something from me. "It's cold out here. Let me in." The silhouette shifted, and in the moonlight filtering through the tent, I could see that while the shape had Mark's broad shoulders and the slight tilt of his head that I'd once found endearing, it wasn't human. The proportions were wrong, the arms too long, the fingers tapering into points. "Go away!" I screamed, my voice echoing across the lake. "You're not him! Leave me alone!" The silhouette remained motionless for a long moment. Then it leaned closer to the tent, and when it spoke again, all pretense of being Mark was gone. The voice was back to that fluid, multi-toned whisper. "We can be anyone you've lost, anyone you've loved, anyone you've ever wanted. But we can also be your worst nightmare if you reject our gift." The tent walls bulged inward as though tremendous pressure was being applied from all sides simultaneously. The nylon strained but held. My ears popped as though the air pressure had suddenly changed and the temperature plummeted. My breath came in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the inside of the tent. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The presence outside vanished, the temperature normalized, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The abrupt absence of terror was almost as shocking as its presence had been. I sat motionless, afraid to believe it was over. Outside, an owl hooted, such a normal, natural sound that I nearly wept with relief. That relief was short-lived. From the direction of the lake came a sound that turned my blood to ice, the splash of something large emerging from water, followed by the wet, slapping sounds of something heavy dragging itself onto shore. Then another splash and another, until the night was filled with the sounds of multiple somethings leaving the lake. I doused my headlamp and carefully, silently, unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. What I saw will haunt me until my dying day. In the moonlight, dark figures were emerging from Caribou Lake, humanoid but clearly not human. Their movements were fluid yet wrong, joints bending in impossible directions, elongated limbs propelling them up from the depths. Their skin glistened wet and dark in the moonlight, and where their faces should have been were only smooth, featureless expanses with vertical slits that opened occasionally to reveal rows of glinting teeth. They moved with purpose toward the stone circle I'd found earlier, gathering around it in a ring. As I watched, frozen in horror, one of them placed something in the center, something that writhed and thrashed weakly. A person. There was a person in the middle of that circle. Without conscious thought, I grabbed my bear spray and knife and slipped out of the tent. Some deeply buried instinct told me I couldn't leave another human being to whatever fate awaited them in that circle. Keeping to the shadows, I crept closer, using the boulders and stunted trees as cover. As I drew nearer, I could see that the figure in the circle was a man in his 30s, soaking wet and clearly terrified. His wrists and ankles were bound with what looked like twisted lakeweed, incredibly strong and fibrous. He was trying to speak, but only muffled sounds escaped through the gag in his mouth. The creatures, I counted 7 of them, began a swaying motion, moving in perfect unison as a low, humming sound emanated from their slit mouths. The humming formed a discordant melody that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The stones of the circle began to glow with a pale blue light that spread inward toward the captive man. I had to act now. I emerged from my hiding place and sprinted toward the circle, screaming at the top of my lungs and blasting the bear spray ahead of me. The creatures reacted immediately, their faceless heads swiveling in my direction, the vertical slits widening to emit high-pitched shrieks that sent stabbing pain through my eardrums. 2 of them moved to intercept me, their long limbs covering ground with frightening speed. The bear spray seemed to confuse them momentarily. They reared back, slit mouths contorting, but they kept coming. I slashed wildly with my knife, connecting with something cold and slick that parted under the blade with surprising ease. A dark, viscous liquid sprayed from the wound, and the creature emitted a sound like escaping steam. I ducked past them and reached the circle where the captive man's eyes widened in shock at seeing another human. I slashed at his bindings with my knife, the lakeweed parting reluctantly under the blade. "Run!" I screamed as I freed his hands. "Get up and run!" He ripped the gag from his mouth. "They're lake people," he gasped, his voice hoarse. "Old legends say they need human vessels to walk on land." The remaining creatures were closing in, moving more cautiously now but forming a tightening circle around us. The blue glow from the stones intensified, pulsing in rhythm with their humming. "The journal," the man said frantically as I cut through his ankle bindings. Was there a journal? Yes, I found it earlier. Daniel's. I'm Daniel. They've kept me in the lake for weeks, but they need the ritual to fully claim me. The journal is the key. It contains part of me they couldn't take. The nearest creature lunged, impossibly fast. I swung my knife in desperation, catching it across what would be a chest on a human. It recoiled, the wound gaping to reveal not blood and tissue but a glimpse of something like the night sky. Vast, dark, and filled with distant lights that were not stars. Daniel was free now, scrambling to his feet. "The journal," he insisted. "We need to destroy it." The journal lay where I'd left it, in the center of the stone circle. As Daniel lunged for it, the blue light from the stones converged on the leather-bound book, lifting it into the air. The pages began to turn on their own, faster and faster, as the creature's humming rose to a painful crescendo. Daniel grabbed the floating journal with both hands. The moment he touched it, both he and the book burst into blue flame. He didn't scream, didn't try to drop it. Instead, he looked at me with an expression of profound relief. "Run," he said calmly as the fire consumed him. "Don't look back. Don't listen to the whispers." The creatures shrieked in what could only be described as rage, converging on the burning man and journal. The flames spread to them as they touched Daniel. igniting their slick bodies. The blue fire cast wild shadows across the lakeshore as more creatures emerged from the water, drawn by the commotion. I did as Daniel said. I ran. Blindly, desperately, I crashed through underbrush and scrambled over rocky terrain, guided only by the need to put distance between myself and what was happening at the stone circle. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing behind a large boulder far from the lake. As I lay there gasping for breath, an unearthly wail rose from the direction of the lake, a sound of such ancient rage and frustration that it seemed to vibrate the ground beneath me. Then silence fell, heavy and complete. I didn't move until dawn broke. When I finally gathered the courage to peer around the boulder, I saw that I'd run far enough to reach the trail leading down from Caribou Lake. In the early morning light, it looked innocuous, just a dirt path winding through the wilderness. I didn't return for my tent or any of my gear. I just started walking downhill, moving as quickly as my exhausted body would allow. The trail seemed straightforward now, with no confusing turns or loops leading back to the lake. By midday, I reached the Canyon Creek section that I recognized from my hike up. That's when I saw the boot, the same men's hiking boot I'd found near the cliff overlook the day before, now sitting in the middle of the trail as if placed there deliberately. It was impossible. I'd left that boot miles away in a completely different location. As I stood staring at it, frozen in place, water began to seep from the boot, forming a small, dark puddle on the dry dirt of the trail. The puddle grew, spreading outward until it was large enough to reflect the sky overhead, and something else. A face looked up at me from the water, not my own reflection, but Daniel's. His expression was peaceful now, his eyes clear. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I found myself leaning closer, trying to understand. The surface of the puddle shattered as something thrust upward. A hand, pale and glistening wet, reaching for me with elongated fingers. I stumbled backward with a scream, falling hard on the rocky trail. When I looked again, the puddle was gone, the ground completely dry. The boot remained, innocent and ordinary in appearance. I ran the rest of the way down the trail, passing startled hikers heading up who stared at the wild-eyed woman with no gear sprinting past them. I didn't stop to warn them. What would I say? That creatures lived in Caribou Lake? That they could mimic loved ones and capture people? I'd sound insane. When I reached my car, the elderly man from before was sitting on a fallen log nearby, whittling a piece of wood with a small pocket knife. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "You heard them, didn't you?" he asked, not looking up from his carving. "The whispers." I nodded, unable to form words. "But you didn't answer," he continued. "That's why you're still you." "There was a man," I managed to say. "Daniel. They had him, but he burned." The old man nodded slowly. "Daniel Espinosa. Forest Service has been looking for him for weeks." He finally looked up at me, his pale blue eyes knowing. "He was taken, but you gave him a way out. That counts for something." "What are they?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The Wintu called them water thieves, beings that steal reflections, then souls, then bodies. They've been here longer than people have. He pocketed his knife and tossed the half-finished carving into the underbrush. "They'll call to you now, you know. Now that they know your name, your fears, your desires, distance won't matter. When you see still water, don't look too long at your reflection. It might not be yours anymore." He stood and walked toward the trailhead, where a group of weekend hikers was gathering, checking maps and adjusting backpacks. "Wait," I called after him. "Shouldn't we warn them?" He glanced back at me with a sad smile. "Would you have believed me 2 days ago?" He was right. I wouldn't have. I drove home in a daze, and in the weeks since I've tried to convince myself it was all some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But I know better. I've covered all the mirrors in my apartment. I no longer take baths, only quick showers with my eyes closed. I've emptied the decorative fountain in my building's lobby twice, only to find it refilled each morning. And sometimes when everything is quiet, I hear the whispers. They know what I want now, what would tempt me most. They promise me Daniel is waiting, that he found peace, that I could join him. All I have to do is answer, to say yes just once. I never do, but sometimes I wonder how long I can resist. After all, the water is patient, it has forever to wait, and sooner or later, everyone gets thirsty. My name is Brian Wright, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Trinity Alps Wilderness, California, 3 years ago. I still wake up some nights, my sheets drenched in sweat, heart hammering against my ribs as if trying to escape. What we experienced there changed us forever. Some nights I wonder if any of us truly made it back. It started as a celebration. Megan had just received her PhD in environmental science, and our small group from the tech company where we worked wanted to commemorate her achievement with something special. We weren't just colleagues. After 5 years working on the same team developing ecological monitoring systems, we'd become a tight-knit group. So when Alex suggested a 4-day hiking trip in the Trinity Alps, it seemed perfect. "There's this trail I've been reading about," Alex said during our planning lunch, his lean frame hunched excitedly over his phone as he scrolled through images. Pristine alpine lakes, old-growth forests, and barely any people this time of year. We'd have the mountains to ourselves. Megan's eyes lit up. "That sounds incredible. I've always wanted to explore Trinity." "I'm in," I said, though a flutter of apprehension tickled my stomach. I'd grown up in suburban environments, and while I enjoyed occasional day hikes, I'd never done a multi-day backcountry trek. But I didn't want to be the only one holding back. Alex, our self-appointed wilderness expert with his meticulously maintained gear and subscription to every outdoor magazine in existence, assured us it would be challenging but manageable. 4 days, 3 nights. We'll hit Stewart Fork, then head up to Emerald and Sapphire Lakes. The elevation gain is substantial, but the views are worth it. Daniela, our usually reserved database architect, surprised us all by immediately agreeing. "My therapist says I need to disconnect more," she explained with a small smile. "No cell service sounds therapeutic." The 4th member of our group, Trevor, needed more convincing. "You know, I'm more of a resort guy," he hedged, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "What's the bathroom situation again?" We all laughed, but in the end, even Trevor agreed to come. 5 of us, heading into the wilderness together. If I'd known what waited for us in those mountains, I would have blocked their numbers and moved to another state. The drive from San Francisco took nearly 6 hours. We left early on a Friday morning in mid-September, when Alex assured us the weather would be ideal and the summer crowds gone. The conversation flowed easily as we made our way north, excitement building as urban sprawl gave way to small towns, then to the vast expanse of Shasta Trinity National Forest. By the time we reached the trailhead at the Stewart Fork access point, the afternoon sun was sinking behind the jagged ridgeline of the mountains. The air had a crisp bite to it, carrying the scent of pine and earth. We shouldered our packs, mine feeling unnaturally heavy despite Alex's coaching on minimalist packing, and set off. The initial trail followed the Stewart Fork of the Trinity River, a clear, rushing waterway that carved through a canyon flanked by steep, forested slopes. Our plan was to hike in about 4 miles the first day to reach our initial campsite before sundown. "This is absolutely gorgeous," Megan breathed, pausing to take in the view of sunlight dappling through towering Douglas firs and ponderosa pines. She seemed truly in her element, her usual workplace intensity replaced by a calm, observant presence. "Worth the drive already," I agreed, though my shoulders were already protesting under the weight of my pack. Only Trevor seemed unimpressed. "Doesn't look much different from the redwoods near the city," he muttered, swatting at a mosquito. "Except with more bugs." "These aren't redwoods, they're conifers," Alex corrected, his know-it-all tendencies emerging. "And wait until you see the alpine lakes tomorrow. Nothing like that near the city." We made good time despite being novices. The trail was well maintained, winding alongside the river, occasionally climbing up rocky switchbacks before descending again to the water's edge. As we hiked, I noticed Daniela had fallen unusually quiet, even for her. "Everything okay?" I asked, dropping back to walk beside her. She gave me a tight smile. "I'm fine, just, I don't know. Since we entered the forest, I've had this weird feeling." "Weird how?" She shook her head. "Like we're being watched? It's silly. I'm not used to spaces this open." She adjusted her glasses and quickened her pace, ending the conversation. I dismissed it then. We were all adjusting to being away from our computers and fluorescent lighting. But later, I'd remember her words and wonder if she'd somehow sensed what was coming. We reached our first campsite just as the forest was darkening. It was a small clearing near the river, surrounded by ancient trees that seemed to whisper as the wind rustled through their branches. Alex took charge, instructing us on tent setup while Megan filtered water from the river. Trevor complained about the rocky ground but helped gather firewood, and Daniela quietly organized our cooking supplies. With camp established and a small fire crackling, we sat in a circle, passing around a flask of whiskey Trevor had insisted on bringing despite Alex's lecture about pack weight. The stars emerged above us, impossibly bright and numerous without city light pollution. The moment felt perfect. Friends sharing an adventure, disconnected from deadlines and screens, surrounded by wilderness that had existed long before us and would remain long after. To Megan, Alex raised the flask. Doctor of Environmental Science and all-around badass. To no emails for 4 days, Trevor added. To new experiences, I said. To the mountains, Daniela said softly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. May they let us pass safely. Something about her toast sent a chill down my spine despite the warmth of the fire and whiskey, but I pushed the feeling away, attributing it to the unfamiliar surroundings and the growing darkness beyond our small circle of light. We turned in early, exhausted from the drive and hike. I shared a tent with Trevor, who complained about the hardness of the ground for 20 minutes before his breathing finally evened into sleep. I lay awake longer, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest at night, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of nocturnal creatures, and, beneath it all, the constant murmur of the river. Just as I was drifting off, a sound pierced the night, a cry that seemed neither human nor animal, echoing through the canyon. I sat up abruptly, heart racing. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Trevor. His only response was a light snore. I unzipped the tent flap and peered out. The campsite was bathed in moonlight, peaceful and still. No movement, no signs of disturbance. Maybe I dreamed it. Or maybe it was just a mountain lion or some other creature I wasn't familiar with. This was their territory after all. I zipped the tent closed and lay back down, but sleep was elusive now. Each time I started to drift off, I imagined hearing that cry again, just on the edge of perception. And underneath it all was a strange sensation, similar to what Daniela had described. The feeling of being observed, of alien eyes tracking our movements. When I finally slept, my dreams were fragmented and disturbing. In them, I wandered endless forest paths, searching for our campsite, always aware of something following just behind me, keeping pace but never revealing itself. I woke unrested as dawn light filtered through the tent fabric. Outside, Alex was already up, boiling water for coffee on our small camp stove. "Morning," he greeted me cheerfully. "Sleep well?" "Not really," I admitted, accepting a steaming cup. "Did you hear anything strange last night? A sort of cry?" His brow furrowed. "Can't say I did. What did it sound like?" I struggled to describe it. Kind of echoing? Not quite a scream, not quite a howl. I don't know. "Probably a fox," he said dismissively. "They can make some eerily human sounds." "Right," I agreed, though unconvinced. "Probably a fox." As the others emerged from their tents, I noticed dark circles under Daniela's eyes that matched my own. "Bad night?" I asked quietly. She nodded but didn't elaborate, busying herself with breakfast preparations. The second day's hike would be more challenging, with significant elevation gain as we made our way to Emerald Lake. After breaking camp and refilling our water bottles, we set off again, the trail immediately beginning to climb. The forest changed as we ascended. The massive conifers gave way to smaller, hardier trees, and eventually, the landscape opened into meadows dotted with wildflowers and framed by steep granite slopes. Above us, the sky was a perfect blue, with only a few wispy clouds clinging to the highest peaks. Despite the beauty, I couldn't shake my unease from the night before. Every time the trail passed through a stand of trees, I found myself scanning the shadows, expecting to glimpse whatever had made that sound. Once I was certain I saw movement, a dark figure slipping behind a large boulder, but when I looked more carefully, nothing was there. Around midday, we stopped at a vista point overlooking the canyon we'd hiked through. Below us, the Stewart Fork glinted silver in the sunlight, and in the distance we could see the jagged ridges of the Trinity Alps extending to the horizon. "This is why we came," Alex said, breathing deeply. "You don't get this from Google Earth." Megan was taking photographs, her face alight with the joy of being in the wilderness she'd studied for so long. Trevor, despite his earlier complaints, seemed genuinely impressed, while Daniela sat slightly apart from the group, her gaze fixed on a distant point. "You okay?" I asked her for the second time that day. She startled as if I'd interrupted a deep thought. "I'm fine. It's just, do you see that structure? Over there on that ridge?" I followed her pointing finger but saw only rocky outcroppings and scattered trees. "What structure?" "I thought I saw something like a tower, or maybe an old fire lookout?" She shook her head. "It's gone now. Must have been a trick of the light." But her words disturbed me. I hadn't told anyone about the figure I thought I'd glimpsed earlier. The trail grew steeper and more challenging as the afternoon progressed. Loose rocks rolled under our boots, and in some places, we had to use our hands to scramble up rocky sections. Trevor slipped once, twisting his ankle slightly, which slowed our pace. "I'm fine," he insisted when Alex suggested we take a longer break. "Let's just get to this lake before dark." We pushed on, but I noticed our group spreading out more than before. Alex led the way, followed by Megan, then Trevor limping slightly with Daniela and me bringing up the rear. The gaps between us grew as the trail demanded more of our focus and energy. That's when I first noticed the whispering. At first, I thought it was just the wind through the stunted trees that clung to the mountainside. But as I paused to catch my breath, I realized the sounds had distinct patterns, rising and falling cadences that seemed almost, but not quite, like words. "Do you hear that?" I asked Daniela, who had stopped beside me. She went very still, listening. Then she nodded, her face pale beneath her tan. "It's been coming and going for the last hour. I thought I was imagining it." We stood there, straining to make sense of the sounds, but they remained just beyond comprehension, like overhearing a conversation in a language you almost know but can't quite translate. "Hey!" Alex's voice carried down from a switchback above us. "Keep up. Lake's only about a mile ahead." The reminder of our destination broke the spell. We resumed hiking, but now I was acutely aware of the whispering that seemed to follow us, growing clearer whenever we passed through patches of trees or shadow. By the time we reached Emerald Lake, the sun was low in the sky, painting the surrounding granite peaks in shades of gold and rose. The lake itself was a perfect oval of deep, vibrant green-blue, nestled in a rocky cirque. Under different circumstances, I would have been awestruck by its beauty. "It's perfect," Megan breathed, dropping her pack and approaching the shore. "Worth every blister," Trevor agreed, sinking onto a flat rock with relief. Alex was already scouting for the best campsite, his boundless energy apparently undiminished by the day's hike. "There's a good spot over there, sheltered by those boulders." Only Daniela seemed unmoved by our arrival, her attention focused on the far shore of the lake. I followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual, just stone and water and the deepening shadows of evening. We set up camp more efficiently this time, with everyone falling into their roles. As darkness descended, we gathered around another small fire, our aching muscles grateful for the chance to rest. The night was colder at this elevation, and we huddled closer to the flames, eating our freeze-dried meals in near silence. "Anyone else notice something weird on the hike up?" I finally asked, unable to keep my concerns to myself any longer. "Like what?" Alex asked. "Sounds, like whispering. Or maybe, I don't know. It felt like something was following us." Trevor snorted. "Probably just that fox of yours again." "I heard it too," Daniela said quietly. "Not like any animal I know." An uncomfortable silence fell. Even Alex looked unsettled now. "I didn't hear anything," Megan said, "but I've had this feeling all day." She trailed off, seeming embarrassed. "What feeling?" I prompted. She hesitated. "Like we're trespassing? That's not quite right. More like we're being tolerated, but only barely." "By what? The squirrels?" Trevor laughed, but it sounded forced. "Maybe it's just fatigue," Alex suggested practically. "We're all tired and in an unfamiliar environment. The brain plays tricks." "Maybe," I agreed, wanting to believe him. But that night, the sounds came again. Not just the strange cry I'd heard before, but a chorus of whispers that seemed to circle our campsite. I lay rigid in my sleeping bag, eyes wide in the darkness, listening as the voices rose and fell like waves, always just beyond comprehension. Beside me, Trevor stirred. "You hear that?" he whispered, his earlier skepticism gone. "Yeah," I breathed. "I do." "What the hell is it?" "I don't know." We lay there, barely breathing as the whispers continued. Sometimes they seemed to retreat, growing fainter until I thought they'd stopped, only to surge again, closer than before. Once, I was certain I heard my name among the unintelligible sounds, which sent a spike of pure terror through me. "We should wake the others," Trevor whispered. "And do what?" I asked. "We can't hike out in the dark." Before he could answer, a scream tore through the night. A human scream, coming from the direction of the lake. We bolted upright, fumbling for our headlamps. "That's Megan!" Trevor gasped, already unzipping the tent. We tumbled out into the moonlit campsite. Alex was emerging from his tent, wild-eyed and confused. Daniela stood near the remains of our fire, flashlight beam dancing erratically across the ground. "Where's Megan?" I shouted. "Her tent's empty," Daniela's voice shook. "I checked when I heard her scream." We called Megan's name, our voices echoing off the basin walls that surrounded the lake. No answer came, only the distant whispers that now seemed to mock our panic. "She must have gone to the lake," Alex said, grabbing his own flashlight. "Maybe to get water or something." We rushed toward the shore, our light beams cutting through the darkness, reflecting off the still surface of the water. The lake looked different at night. Not emerald, but black, a void that seemed to absorb our light rather than reflect it. "There," Trevor pointed to a pile of clothing on a rock near the water's edge. "Megan's jacket and boots." "Why would she—" Daniela began, but stopped as her light caught something in the water. About 20 feet from shore, something broke the surface. A pale form that rose slightly, then sank again. A hand reaching upward. "Megan!" Alex screamed, already kicking off his shoes. "Wait!" I grabbed his arm. "We don't know what's out there. She's drowning." He wrenched free of my grip and plunged into the water. The rest of us stood frozen on the shore, our lights trained on Alex's form as he swam toward where we'd seen the hand. The water around him seemed to move strangely, not with the clean ripples of a swimmer, but with odd, circular patterns that spread outward, as if something large was moving beneath the surface. "Alex, come back!" Trevor yelled, but Alex had reached the spot and dove under. Seconds stretched painfully as we waited for him to resurface. When he did, he was gasping, turning in circles. "I can't find her," he called back. "There's nothing here." "Get out of the water," Daniela suddenly screamed with more force than I'd ever heard from her. Something in her voice must have reached Alex because he immediately began swimming back toward shore. But he seemed to be struggling, his strokes growing weaker as if something was pulling at him from below. "Something's got my leg," he cried, then disappeared beneath the surface. Without thinking, I handed my flashlight to Trevor and dove in. The water was shockingly cold, instantly numbing my skin. Beneath the surface, all was black and disorienting. I could make out nothing, feel nothing but the crushing cold. My lungs began to burn, and I surfaced for air, trying to orient myself. There. Trevor was pointing his light about 10 feet away from me. I swam toward where he indicated and dove again. This time, my hand connected with fabric, Alex's shirt. I grabbed it and pulled, meeting resistance. It felt as if something had a grip on him, something with substantial strength. I yanked harder, kicking with all my might, and suddenly the resistance gave way. I surfaced with Alex, his weight nearly dragging me back under. "Help me!" I gasped. Trevor had waded in up to his waist and reached for us, pulling us toward shore while Daniela kept her light trained on the water behind us, as if watching for pursuit. We collapsed on the rocky shore, Alex coughing up water, me shivering uncontrollably. As my vision cleared, I saw that his lower leg was lacerated, with long, parallel cuts that oozed blood onto the stones. "What happened?" Trevor demanded. "What did that?" Alex shook his head, still coughing. "Don't know. Felt like hands. Many hands." "Where's Megan?" Daniela asked, her voice small and frightened. None of us had an answer. We called for her again, our voices echoing across the water, but received no response. The whispering had stopped, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. We treated Alex's leg as best we could with our first aid kit, cleaning the wounds and binding them with gauze. The cuts were deep but had missed any major blood vessels. Still, he wouldn't be hiking anywhere quickly. "We need to find Megan," he insisted, trying to stand but wincing as he put weight on his injured leg. "We need to get out of here," Daniela countered. "Something's wrong with this place, with that lake." "We can't leave without Megan," I said, though part of me agreed with Daniela. Every instinct was screaming at me to flee this place. Trevor had been unusually quiet, staring out at the lake. Now he turned to us, his face pale in the moonlight. "What if we can't find her? What if whatever took her comes back?" "Nothing took her," Alex said firmly. "She probably fell in, maybe hit her head. We need to search the shore, check if she managed to climb out somewhere else." But his voice lacked conviction. We'd all felt it now, the malevolent presence that seemed to permeate this place, that had whispered our names and reached for us from the depths of the too still water. We decided to wait until first light to search more thoroughly. None of us was willing to split up, so we gathered our sleeping bags and huddled together near the remains of our fire, taking turns to keep watch. I volunteered for the first shift, partly because I knew sleep would be impossible. As the others settled into an uneasy rest, I stared out at the lake, now silver under the moon. The surface remained unbroken, peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd felt in the water, something alive and hostile, something that had tried to drag Alex down and might have succeeded with Megan. My mind raced through explanations. A predator, bear, mountain lion, could have attacked Megan, dragged her to the water. But that wouldn't explain the whispering, or the strange cuts on Alex's leg, or the presence I'd felt in the water. None of it made sense in the rational world I inhabited, the world of code and algorithms and predictable outcomes. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the movement at the far shore of the lake. A figure walking slowly along the water's edge. Even in the dim light, I recognized Megan's silhouette. "Guys!" I hissed, shaking the others awake. "It's Megan! Over there!" They scrambled up, following my pointing finger. The figure had stopped and seemed to be staring in our direction. "Megan!" Alex shouted, his voice cracking with relief. The figure didn't respond or wave. After a moment, it turned and walked into the trees that bordered the far side of the lake, disappearing from view. "Why didn't she answer?" Trevor asked, voicing what we were all thinking. "Maybe she didn't hear?" I suggested, not believing it myself. Sound carried easily across the still water. She would have heard Alex's shout. "We need to go after her," Alex said, already stuffing his sleeping bag into its compression sack. "She might be injured, disoriented." "It's still dark," Daniela protested, "and the trail doesn't go that way." "We can follow the shoreline," Alex insisted. "If we leave now, we can catch up to her." His determination was infectious, and despite my misgivings, I found myself packing up alongside the others. We left most of our gear cached at the campsite, taking only essentials: water, first aid, emergency supplies. Alex winced with each step but refused to stay behind. The lake's circumference was about a mile, according to our map. In daylight on a clear trail, it would have been an easy walk. But in the pre-dawn darkness, picking our way over boulders and through patches of dense brush, it was slow and treacherous going. We'd made it perhaps a quarter of the way around when the whispering started again. It came from the trees to our right, away from the water, and seemed to pace us as we moved. This time, I could almost make out words. My name again, and what sounded like pleas or warnings, though in no language I recognized. "Ignore it," Alex said tightly. "Focus on finding Megan." But as we continued, the whispering grew more insistent, more frantic, and now it was joined by other sounds: rustling in the underbrush, the crack of twigs, the displacement of small stones from higher up the slope. We were being flanked, followed by something that stayed just out of sight. The sky had begun to lighten, the stars fading as dawn approached. In the growing light, I noticed something odd about the trees we were passing: carvings in the bark, symbols that looked ancient and deliberate, spirals, stick figures with too many limbs, patterns of dots and lines that formed no alphabet I knew. "Guys," I said, stopping to examine one particularly elaborate carving. "Look at this." The others gathered around, their flashlight beams illuminating the symbol, a complex spiral with what appeared to be eyes dotted throughout its coils. "Native American?" Trevor suggested. "I don't think so." Megan would have known, I thought with a pang. With her background in environmental science, she'd studied the indigenous cultures of Northern California. "These look different." "We don't have time for this," Alex said, his face gray with pain and worry. "We need to find Megan." We pressed on, but I couldn't stop noticing the carvings, which grew more numerous and complex as we continued around the lake. Some seemed fresh, the exposed wood still pale; others were ancient, the cuts weathered and almost grown over. As we rounded a small promontory, the trees ahead cleared, revealing a structure on the shore that stopped us in our tracks. A crude shelter or altar, built of driftwood and stones, decorated with what appeared to be bones: small animal skulls, vertebrae, and longer limb bones arranged in intricate patterns. "What the hell is that?" Trevor whispered. None of us had an answer. It looked both recently constructed and ancient, with moss growing on some of the lower stones even as bleached wood pieces seemed freshly added to the top. "Someone else is up here," Alex said. "Campers or someone." But there were no signs of conventional camping. No fire ring, no trampled grass, no food storage, just this strange structure facing the lake like a sentinel. "We should go back," Daniela said, her voice shaking. "Something's wrong here. This isn't normal." For the first time, Alex's determination seemed to waver. He stared at the bone structure, then at his injured leg, which had begun to bleed through the bandages. Before he could respond, movement caught my eye. A figure emerging from the trees beyond the altar. Megan. But even at this distance, I could tell something was wrong. Her movements were stiff, awkward, as if she was being puppeted by invisible strings. And when she turned toward us, her face was blank, expressionless, her eyes reflecting the early light like polished stone. "Megan," Alex called, taking a step forward. She didn't respond, just stood watching us. Behind her, shadows moved in the trees. More figures, partially obscured but unmistakably present. Watching. Waiting. "That's not Megan," Daniela whispered. "Not anymore." As if triggered by her words, Megan's mouth opened and a sound emerged. Not her voice, but the same whispering we'd been hearing, now amplified and distorted as it passed through her human vocal cords. The effect was chilling, like hearing a foreign language played at the wrong speed. The shadows behind her shifted, moving closer to the edge of the trees. I caught glimpses of pale forms, too tall and thin to be human, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. "Run," I said, my voice strangled by fear. "We need to run, now." No one argued. We turned as one and fled back the way we'd come, stumbling over rocks and roots in our panic. Alex fell once, crying out as his injured leg hit the ground, but Trevor and I hauled him up, supporting him between us as we continued our desperate retreat. The whispers followed, rising to a cacophony that seemed to come from all directions, from the trees, from the lake, even from the ground beneath our feet. And with it came sounds of pursuit, cracking branches, the scrabble of something moving fast through the underbrush, always just behind us or to the side, herding us back toward our campsite. When we finally reached our camp, we found it destroyed. Our tents had been shredded, the contents of our packs scattered across the rocky ground. Even our carefully hung food bags had been torn down, their contents missing. "What do we do?" Trevor gasped, helping Alex sink to the ground. "We can't stay here." "Hike out," I said immediately. "Right now. Leave everything we don't absolutely need." Daniela was already gathering what she could salvage: water bottles, a first aid kit, emergency blankets. Her hands shook, but her movements were methodical, focused. "What about Megan?" she asked without looking up. None of us answered. We'd all seen what approached us at the altar. Whatever it wasn't Megan anymore, or if it was, she was beyond our help. We abandoned most of our gear, taking only what would fit in our day packs. Alex fashioned a makeshift walking stick from a tree branch, grimacing as he tested his weight on it. His leg was worse, the bandages now soaked through, and the flesh around the wounds had taken on an angry, inflamed appearance. But he didn't complain, and none of us suggested he rest. We all felt the same urgency, to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and Emerald Lake. The hike out was a nightmare. We moved as quickly as Alex's injury allowed, pushing ourselves to exhaustion. The whispers followed us, sometimes fading to near silence, only to surge again with renewed vigor. Twice, I thought I glimpsed figures moving parallel to our path through the trees. Pale, elongated forms that ducked out of sight whenever I turned my head directly toward them. By mid-afternoon, Alex's condition had worsened. His face was flushed with fever, and he leaned more heavily on his improvised staff with each step. When we stopped briefly to rest and check his wound, I almost gagged at the sight. The cuts had deepened somehow, the edges puffy and weeping a clear fluid that wasn't pus but something else, something that seemed to move slightly when caught in a shaft of sunlight. "We need to clean it again," Daniela said, reaching for our dwindling supply of alcohol wipes. "No time," Alex panted. "We need to keep moving." He was right. The sun was already sinking toward the western peaks, and we were still miles from the trailhead. The prospect of another night in the Trinity Alps, with whatever had claimed Megan hunting us, was unthinkable. We pushed on, maintaining a grim silence broken only by the sounds of our labored breathing and the continuous maddening whispers that dogged our steps. The trail seemed different on the way down, narrower in places, overgrown with vegetation I didn't remember from our ascent. Twice we had to backtrack after finding ourselves on what appeared to be game trails that led away from our route. "Are we lost?" Trevor finally asked, voicing what we'd all been fearing. "No," I said with more confidence than I felt. "The trail follows the river. As long as we keep heading downhill, We'll reach the trailhead eventually. But as the light faded, my certainty wavered. The forest around us had grown denser, the trees pressing closer to the trail, their branches intertwining overhead to block out the fading daylight. And the whispers had changed, becoming more urgent, more intelligible. Now I could almost understand them, almost grasp the warnings or threats they contained. We were forced to stop when Alex collapsed, his injured leg finally giving out beneath him. We eased him to the ground against a fallen log, and Daniela held her flashlight while I examined his wound again. What I saw made my blood run cold. The cuts had widened to form a distinct pattern, a spiral similar to the carvings we'd seen on the trees near the lake, and within the spiral, tiny, hair-thin filaments moved independently, like miniature tentacles reaching upward from within his flesh. "Oh, God," Trevor moaned, turning away. Alex stared down at his leg, his face a mask of horror and resignation. "It's inside me," he whispered. "I can feel it moving, spreading." "We'll get you to a hospital," I promised, not believing my own words. "Just a few more miles." But Alex shook his head. "I'm not going to make it, and neither will you if you try to carry me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his hunting knife, pressing it into my hand. "You know what needs to happen." "No," I recoiled. "We're not leaving you, and we're definitely not that." His fingers closed around mine, forcing me to grip the knife. "Then help me do it myself. But I'm not becoming like her. Like Megan." The mention of her name hung in the air between us. We all remembered her blank eyes, her mouth moving with voices not her own. "We're all getting out," Daniela said firmly, taking the knife from my unresisting fingers and tucking it away. "Brian, Trevor, make a stretcher, use branches and our jackets." Her tone brooked no argument. While she tended to Alex, trying to clean his wound as best she could, Trevor and I gathered sturdy branches and lashed them together with strips torn from our spare clothing. It was crude but functional, a frame we could use to drag Alex rather than carry him. As full darkness descended, we set off again, Trevor and I taking turns to pull the makeshift stretcher while Daniela led the way with her flashlight. Our progress was painfully slow, the trail increasingly difficult to follow. Several times we found ourselves in unfamiliar terrain, forced to backtrack and search for the main path. And all around us, the forest had come alive with sound. The whispers were now a constant chorus, interspersed with rustling movements and occasional sharp cracks, like branches snapping under heavy weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded, driven along a path not of our choosing. "We're going in circles," Trevor finally said, his voice cracking with exhaustion. We'd stopped at what appeared to be a fork in the trail, though neither branch looked familiar. "That's impossible," I said, though without conviction. "We've been heading downhill the whole time." "Look," Trevor pointed at a distinctive fallen tree beside the trail. "We passed that an hour ago. I remember because it looks like a crocodile." He was right. The log, with its gnarled roots resembling teeth, was unmistakable. We had been here before. "Something's manipulating the trail," Daniela whispered, "changing it." "Trails don't change," I snapped, though I was thinking of the symbols on the trees, the unnatural structure by the lake, Megan's blank eyes. In this place, perhaps the normal rules didn't apply. A low moan from Alex refocused our attention. He was conscious but delirious with fever, his eyes glassy and unfocused. When he spoke, his voice was slurred. "They want us to stay," he mumbled. "Become part of it. Like Megan, like the others before." "What others?" I asked, kneeling beside him. "Alex, what do you know about this place?" He turned his head toward me, but his gaze seemed to look through rather than at me. So many before us. In the water, in the trees. They need vessels. A chill ran through me. "Alex, fight it. Whatever's happening to you, fight it." His expression cleared briefly, fear replacing the vacant look. "Brian, you need to—" He broke off with a gasp. his back arching as if in pain. When he relaxed again, something had changed in his face, a subtle alteration that made him look both like himself and not, as if something else was looking through his eyes. "Leave me," he said, his voice stronger now but somehow wrong, the cadence too measured, the tone too flat. "Save yourselves." Trevor grabbed my arm, pulling me back from the stretcher. "We need to go," he hissed. "Now." "We can't leave him," I protested, though I had backed away instinctively. "That's not Alex anymore," Daniela whispered, her flashlight beam fixed on Alex's face. "Look at his eyes." I did, and my heart seemed to freeze in my chest. Where Alex's brown eyes had been, milky white orbs now stared back at us, pupilless and alien. His mouth curved in a smile that contained no warmth or recognition. "Run," Trevor said, and this time I didn't argue. We abandoned the stretcher and fled down the trail, no longer caring which fork we took, driven only by the need to escape what Alex had become. Behind us, I heard a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years, a wet, tearing noise, followed by something heavy moving through the underbrush. Not following the trail, but moving straight through the forest, paralleling our desperate flight. The whispers had risen to a crescendo now, no longer trying to mimic words, but filling the night with an alien symphony that seemed to emanate from the darkness itself. I ran blindly, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Beside me, Daniela sobbed as she ran. Ahead, Trevor's flashlight beam bounced wildly, our only guide in the absolute blackness of the forest. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing in a small clearing. I had no idea how far we'd come or in what direction. The trail was long lost, and with it any certainty of finding our way back to civilization. "What's happening?" Trevor gasped between ragged breaths. "What is this place?" Daniela was shaking uncontrollably, her arms wrapped around herself as if for protection. "Something ancient," she whispered. "Something that was here long before us. I think it's what the symbols were warning about, marking its territory." "But what happened to Megan? To Alex?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. "It took them," Daniela said simply. "It's inside them now. Using them. For what? To get more. To get us." The matter-of-fact way she said it chilled me more than any wild speculation could have. She wasn't theorizing. She was stating what she somehow knew to be true. "How do you know this?" Trevor demanded, voicing my own suspicion. Daniela's eyes reflected the beam of Trevor's flashlight. "Because it's been whispering to me, too. Telling me things. Showing me." Trevor and I exchanged alarmed glances. Is it in you too?" I asked carefully. She shook her head. "Not yet, but it's trying. It shows me things when I close my eyes. The lake, the people before us. What happened to them?" "What did happen to them?" Trevor asked. "They became part of it. Some in the water, some in the trees. It's been here so long, collecting, growing." A rustling sound from the darkness surrounding our small clearing interrupted her. We froze, listening. The sound came again, closer now, vegetation being pushed aside by something large moving deliberately toward us. "We need to move," I whispered, helping Daniela to her feet. "Where?" Trevor hissed. "We don't even know where we are." He was right. In our panic, we'd lost all sense of direction. The clearing offered no clues, just trees that all looked the same in the limited beam of our flashlights, ground covered in the same pine needles and rocks we'd been seeing for days. Then I remembered something from my limited wilderness training. "The moss," I said suddenly. "It grows thicker on the north side of trees, and the Stewart Fork flows west to east. If we can find it again, we can follow it downstream to the trailhead." It was a desperate plan, but it gave us purpose. We examined the trees until we found the telltale patches of moss, then set off in what we hoped was a southerly direction, toward where the river should be. If we were where I thought we were, the river couldn't be more than a mile away. We moved as quietly as we could, stopping frequently to listen for sounds of pursuit. The whispers continued, but they seemed less focused now, more ambient, as if the forest itself was murmuring around us. Several times we glimpsed movement in our peripheral vision, tall, thin shapes that vanished when viewed directly. Once I was certain I saw Megan standing motionless between two distant trees, watching us with her blank, reflective eyes. After what felt like hours but was probably less than one, we heard it, the faint sound of running water. The river. We hurried toward it, hope giving us a second wind. When we broke through the tree line onto the riverbank, I nearly wept with relief. The Stewart Fork glinted in the moonlight, a silver path leading back to safety. All we had to do was follow it downstream. "We made it," Trevor breathed, a smile breaking across his exhausted face. "Don't celebrate yet," Daniela warned, her eyes scanning the opposite bank. "We still have miles to go." She was right, of course. We were still deep in the wilderness, with uncertain terrain ahead and whatever hunted us still out there. But the river was a concrete path forward, a way out that couldn't be altered or obscured. We began to make our way along the bank, choosing our steps carefully on the rocky ground. The river was lower than when we'd hiked in, exposing more of the shore, which made our progress easier. The night had grown colder, our breath visible in the beam of our flashlights, but none of us suggested stopping to rest. The need to escape this place overrode all physical discomfort. We'd been following the river for perhaps an hour when Trevor, who had taken the lead, stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first, I heard only the rush of the river and the ambient sounds of the forest. Then it registered, a rhythmic sound beneath the others. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving rapidly. "They're coming," Daniela whispered. "Hide," I urged, pulling them toward a cluster of boulders near the river's edge. We crouched behind the rocks, dousing our flashlights. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied now by the sound of branches breaking and underbrush being trampled. Whatever approached was making no attempt at stealth. Through a gap between the boulders, I saw them emerge from the forest, Alex and Megan, moving with the same stiff, puppet-like gait we'd seen earlier. But they weren't alone. Behind them came others, pale, elongated figures that seemed to flow rather than walk, their limbs bending at impossible angles, their faces featureless except for milky eyes that reflected the moonlight like polished stone. They paused at the river's edge, heads turning as if scanning the shore. There were 5 of the inhuman figures, plus Alex and Megan, whose bodies now seemed to be undergoing a transformation, their skin taking on the same pallid tone as their companions, their limbs beginning to elongate in ways human bones should not allow. "We need to go," Trevor breathed in my ear so quietly I barely heard him. "While they're distracted." I nodded, but as we began to edge away from our hiding place, Daniela suddenly stiffened beside me. Her eyes had gone wide, and a thin stream of saliva ran from the corner of her mouth. "Daniela," I whispered, gripping her arm. She turned to me, and I saw with horror that her eyes had begun to change. The irises expanding, the color bleeding away to leave behind the same milky whiteness that had consumed Alex's. "They know we're here," she said, her voice overlaid with the now familiar whispering. "They've always known." Trevor cursed and yanked me back just as Daniela lunged forward, her movements already taking on the unnatural quality we'd seen in the others. She scrambled over the rocks, calling out in that same alien whisper voice. The figures by the river turned as one, their blank eyes fixing on our position. Alex's transformed face split in a terrible smile, revealing teeth that had sharpened to points. "Run!" Trevor shouted, abandoning any pretense of stealth. We bolted down river, moving as fast as the treacherous footing would allow. Behind us came sounds of pursuit, not just footsteps now, but a strange sliding, rustling noise, as if some of our hunters were moving through the trees alongside the shore. "Don't look back," Trevor panted as we ran. "Whatever you do, don't look at them." but I couldn't help myself. As we rounded a bend in the river, I glanced over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The things that had been Alex, Megan, and Daniela were changed further now, their bodies elongating, joints dislocating to allow impossible configurations as they flowed over the rocky ground with inhuman speed. Behind them, the pale original creatures moved even faster, flowing like liquid through the moonlight. And they were gaining on us. "We can't outrun them," I gasped to Trevor. "The river," he said, pointing to where the current narrowed between two large boulders. "It's faster there. If we can get across, maybe they won't follow." It was a desperate gamble, but we had no other options. We veered toward the water's edge. The river was loud here, the current visibly strong as it squeezed between the rock formations. "Can you swim?" Trevor shouted over the rush of water. "Yes," I replied, though I wondered if it would matter in that powerful current. "Then go." He pushed me toward the water. "I'll be right behind you." I plunged into the river, the cold instantly driving the breath from my lungs. The current grabbed me immediately, sweeping me downstream as I struggled to keep my head above water. Through the spray, I glimpsed Trevor entering the river behind me, then lost sight of him as I was pulled around a bend. The river carried me through a series of small rapids, bashing me against rocks and submerged logs. I fought to control my descent, kicking toward what I hoped was the opposite shore. My lungs burned, my waterlogged clothes dragging me down, but fear of what pursued us gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. Finally, my feet scraped bottom, and I lunged for a protruding tree root, hauling myself onto the opposite shore. I collapsed there, coughing up river water, every muscle screaming in protest. "Trevor," I called once I could speak. "Trevor?" No answer came. I staggered to my feet, scanning the river upstream and down. Nothing but moonlit water rushing between dark banks. "Trevor!" I shouted again, my voice breaking. Only the sound of the river answered. I stood there, dripping and shivering, facing a terrible choice: search for Trevor, possibly exposing myself to the creatures we'd fled, or continue downstream alone, hoping to reach safety. In the end, survival instinct won out. I couldn't help Trevor if I was captured, changed, like the others. The best chance for both of us was for me to find help, to bring back rescuers who might still find him alive. I turned downstream and began to walk, pushing my battered body forward through sheer will. My flashlight was lost in the river crossing, so I had only moonlight to guide me. The opposite shore remained dark and silent, showing no signs of pursuit, but I knew that meant little. The things that hunted us could move silent as shadows when they chose to. Time became meaningless as I stumbled along the riverbank. My world narrowed to the next step, the next breath, the next moment of putting distance between myself and the horrors behind me. Sometimes I thought I heard whispers carried on the wind, but whether they were real or imagined, I couldn't tell. Dawn was breaking when I finally saw it, a wooden sign marking the boundary of the wilderness area. Beyond it, the forest thinned, and I could make out what appeared to be a parking area, the trailhead, civilization. I broke into a stumbling run, irrationally afraid that safety would somehow be snatched away if I didn't reach it quickly enough. As I burst into the small clearing that served as the trailhead parking lot, I saw a Forest Service truck parked near the information board. A ranger was posting something on the bulletin board. "Help!" I croaked, my voice raw from exhaustion and river water. "Please, help!" The ranger turned, his expression shifting from surprise to alarm as he took in my bedraggled state. Soaked clothes, cuts and bruises, wild eyes. "Sir, are you okay?" He approached cautiously, hand hovering near his radio. "My friends," I gasped, "still up there. Something took them." "Slow down," he said, guiding me to sit on a nearby bench. "What's your name?" "Brian Wright. I was hiking with friends. Emerald Lake. They're still there. We need to go back for them." The ranger's expression changed subtly. "Emerald Lake? In the Trinity Alps Basin?" I nodded frantically. He was silent for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Colton. I need SAR mobilized for the Stewart Fork Trail. Possible missing hikers." He listened to the response, then added, "Yes, the basin again. Copy." The way he said, "again," sent a chill through me. "What do you mean, again?" I demanded. He studied me for a long moment before responding. "We've had incidents in that basin before, hikers going missing. Sometimes we find them, sometimes." He trailed off. "You know," I whispered. "You know about what's up there." His eyes slid away from mine. "I know the Trinity Alps have been giving people bad experiences for generations. The indigenous peoples avoided certain areas, called them thin places, where the boundary between worlds wasn't solid." "That's not what I asked," I pressed. He sighed. "Look, I'm going to get you to a hospital. You're dehydrated. Probably hypothermic. We'll send out search teams for your friends." "They won't find them," I said with certainty. "Not as they were." The ranger didn't respond to that, just helped me to his truck. As he drove me toward the nearest town, I stared out the window at the seemingly innocent forest passing by. How many other places like Emerald Lake existed? How many other ancient things waited in remote corners of wilderness, patient and hungry? The official search for my friends lasted 2 weeks. They found our destroyed campsite, some of our scattered gear. They found Alex's makeshift stretcher, abandoned on the trail. They found one of Trevor's shoes caught on a rock in the river. They found nothing of Megan or Daniela. The official report listed them as missing, presumed drowned. My statement about whispers in the forest, about transforming bodies and inhuman hunters, was attributed to trauma and hypothermia. The park rangers exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking, but said nothing to contradict the official narrative. I've spent the 3 years since then researching the Trinity Alps, gathering stories of other disappearances, other encounters. I found hints in indigenous legends, in old Forest Service reports filed away and forgotten, in the nervous silences of longtime rangers when asked about certain areas. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, I hear them still, the whispers from the forest calling me back, telling me that my friends are waiting, that they miss me, that they've become part of something ancient and vast. And there's a place for me too, if only I return to Emerald Lake. I won't go back, not while I still have the strength to resist. But I wonder how long that will last. And I wonder if someday, years from now, hikers in the Trinity Alps might glimpse a tall, pale figure with Brian Wright's face, moving between the trees with inhuman grace, whispering to them as they sleep beside alpine lakes that reflect nothing but endless sky. My name is Jacob Carter, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Desolation Valley, a remote wilderness area in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. I thought a solo hiking trip would clear my head after my divorce. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. The trailhead parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived that Friday morning in late September. Just a dusty Subaru with Nevada plates and a park ranger's truck. Perfect. I wanted solitude, needed it after the past 6 months of lawyers and paperwork and dividing up 8 years of marriage like it was just another asset to be split down the middle. I shouldered my pack, checked my topo map one last time, and set out on the Granite Pass Trail. The plan was simple. 5 days of hiking through some of the most isolated terrain in the Sierras, camping at alpine lakes, and reconnecting with myself. The weather forecast promised clear skies with a slight chance of rain on Sunday night. Manageable. The first day's hike was exactly what I needed. 11 miles of steady climbing through pine forests that gradually gave way to granite expanses and stunning vistas. The physical exertion burned away the circular thoughts that had been plaguing me for months. By late afternoon, I reached my first campsite at Lake Aloha, a stunning expanse of crystal-clear water dotted with small granite islands. I set up my tent on a flat area with a magnificent view of the lake, built a small fire, and cooked a simple dinner of freeze-dried beef stroganoff. As darkness fell, the stars emerged with a clarity you never see in the city. I sat by the dying embers of my fire, sipping whiskey from my titanium cup, feeling something like peace for the first time in months. That's when I heard it, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from across the lake. I strained my eyes, trying to see if someone else had set up camp on the far shore, but could make out nothing in the darkness. The sound continued for about 10 minutes before abruptly stopping. I dismissed it as another camper, though something about the tone had raised the hair on my arms. Still, exhaustion from the day's hike soon overtook me, and I crawled into my sleeping bag and fell into a dreamless sleep. The next morning dawned clear and cold. I broke camp early, eager to reach Silver Lake by mid-afternoon. The trail grew more challenging as it wound through the desolation wilderness, living up to its name with stark moon-like landscapes and fewer signs of human presence. I passed only one other hiker all day, an older man with a graying beard who nodded curtly as we crossed paths. "Heading to Silver Lake?" he asked, his voice rough as if rarely used. "That's the plan," I replied. "Might want to reconsider. Bunch of trees down across the trail after those windstorms last week. Makes for slow going." He paused, studying my face. "You alone?" Something in his gaze made me uncomfortable. "Meeting friends tomorrow?" I lied. He nodded again. "Smart. Never good to be alone out here, especially not when the aspen turn." Before I could ask what he meant, he continued down the trail, his pace surprisingly quick for his age. I reached Silver Lake by late afternoon. The man had been right about the fallen trees. I'd had to scramble over or around at least a dozen massive pines that blocked the trail. The lake itself was smaller than Aloha, but ringed by aspen trees whose leaves had indeed turned brilliant gold and orange. Under different circumstances, I would have found it beautiful. But something about the old hiker's warning had planted a seed of unease. I set up camp in a small clearing about 50 feet from the shore. As I was gathering firewood, I noticed something odd. A crude figure made of twisted branches leaning against one of the aspens at the edge of my clearing. It was roughly human-shaped, standing about 3 feet tall, with smaller twigs bound together to form limbs. What looked like a crudely carved piece of wood formed its head. Kids, I thought. Some teenager's idea of a Blair Witch joke to freak out campers. I approached it, intending to dismantle it, but something made me hesitate. Up close, I could see that the bindings holding the twigs together weren't string or wire, but what appeared to be dried sinew or some kind of animal tendon. And the head wasn't carved wood as I'd first thought, but a sun-bleached animal skull, perhaps a fox or small coyote, with strange symbols etched into the bone. I backed away, deciding to leave it alone. I'd chosen a campsite on the opposite side of the lake anyway. That night I had trouble starting my fire. The wood was dry, my technique sound, but each time the kindling caught, the flames would sputter and die or burn with an odd greenish tinge. On the 5th attempt, it finally took hold properly, though the flames seemed dimmer than they should have been. I ate a quick dinner of dehydrated chili and crawled into my tent earlier than usual. The temperature had dropped precipitously with nightfall, and an unsettling mist had begun to rise from the lake's surface. As I zipped up my sleeping bag, I heard it again, that strange humming from the night before. Only this time, it seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, surrounding my campsite. I grabbed my headlamp and reluctantly unzipped the tent. The mist had thickened, obscuring the lake entirely. My fire had died to embers despite the fresh log I'd added just minutes earlier. I swept my light in a slow arc around the campsite. The beam seemed unusually weak, barely penetrating the mist. That's when I saw them, stick figures like the one I'd found earlier, now encircling my entire campsite. Dozens of them, each one facing inward toward my tent. I hadn't heard anyone approach. There was no way someone could have placed them there without me noticing. My heart hammering, I retreated into my tent and zipped it shut, as if the thin nylon could offer any protection. The humming grew louder, more insistent. With it came a scraping sound, like branches being dragged across the ground. Sleep was impossible. I lay rigid in my sleeping bag, straining to identify every sound. The humming continued for hours, occasionally punctuated by what sounded like distant, high-pitched laughter. Around what must have been 3 a.m., I finally drifted into an exhausted, fitful sleep. I jerked awake to absolute silence. My watch read 7:13 a.m., but the light filtering through my tent was dim, as if it were still dawn. I reluctantly unzipped the tent and peered out. The stick figures were gone. In their place was a perfect circle of small white stones surrounding my campsite, each stone placed exactly the same distance from the next. Beyond the circle, a dense fog obscured everything more than 20 feet away. I broke camp quickly, shoving gear haphazardly into my pack. My planned route would take me deeper into the wilderness, to Maud Lake, but I decided to abort the trip and head back to the trailhead. The map showed an alternate route that would get me there in about 7 hours of hard hiking. As I shouldered my pack, I noticed my compass was acting strangely, the needle spinning wildly instead of pointing north. My phone showed no signal, expected in this remote area, but the GPS function wasn't working either, displaying an error message I'd never seen before. I'd have to navigate by map alone in limited visibility. I set out in what I believed was the right direction, following a trail that rapidly deteriorated from clear path to faint tracks to nothing at all. The fog persisted, and I began to suspect I'd veered off course, but pressing on seemed better than backtracking to Silver Lake. The terrain became increasingly difficult. Steep granite slopes and dense patches of manzanita that tore at my clothes and skin as I pushed through. By midday, I should have reached Rockbound Valley, but instead found myself in an unfamiliar narrow canyon. The walls rose steeply on either side, and the path ahead descended sharply. Nothing matched my map. I was lost, a realization that sent a spike of primal fear through me. I decided to climb to higher ground, hoping to get above the fog and spot a landmark. The ascent was treacherous. Loose scree sliding beneath my boots, gnarled roots providing the only handholds in some spots. An hour of climbing brought me to a small plateau, but the fog still obscured any distant view. What I did find, however, froze the blood in my veins. A circle of stones, identical to the one that had surrounded my campsite that morning. I was moving in circles, despite having climbed steadily for over an hour. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I forced myself to sit, drink water, and study my map. If I could just find Pyramid Peak, I could orient myself. But the fog showed no signs of lifting, and my compass remained useless, the needle now spinning so rapidly it was just a blur. I decided to follow the sun. Keeping it on my right shoulder would roughly lead me west toward the trailhead. It wasn't much of a plan, but sitting still felt like surrender to whatever was happening. I descended the plateau on the opposite side from which I'd climbed, picking my way carefully down the steep slope. The fog seemed to part ahead of me, revealing just enough of the path to continue before closing again behind me. The effect was disorienting, like moving through a tunnel of mist. After another hour of hiking, I stumbled upon a small cabin, its weathered logs nearly the same gray as the surrounding granite. No smoke rose from its stone chimney, and the small windows were dark. Nothing about it matched what should have been in this area according to my map. I approached cautiously, my instincts screaming that I should turn back, continue trying to find my way out. But exhaustion and the growing certainty that night would catch me still lost in the wilderness pushed me forward. The cabin door hung slightly ajar. I called out, received no answer, and pushed it open. The interior was a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed against the far wall. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, undisturbed for what looked like years. Except for one thing, a compass sitting in the middle of the table, its case gleaming as if recently polished. I approached slowly and saw that, unlike my own compass, its needle was perfectly still, pointing to what should have been northwest according to the orientation of the cabin. An odd direction, neither toward the door nor any of the cardinal points. On an impulse, I stepped outside and walked in the direction the compass had indicated. The fog seemed thinner here, and within 50 yards I found myself on a clear trail, well-maintained, marked with the same trailblazes I was familiar with from national forests. Relief flooded through me. I'd found my way back to a marked trail. Now I just needed to follow it to its end, which would likely lead to a trailhead or at least a ranger station. The trail wound gently downhill through a forest that became denser as I descended. The fog dissipated entirely, replaced by late afternoon sunshine filtering through the pines. Birds called overhead, and twice I spotted deer watching me from the underbrush. Normal, natural forest sounds and sights that should have been reassuring, but something still felt wrong. The trail was too convenient, appearing just when I needed it most. And though the sun was now visible, it appeared to be in the east, not the west where it should have been in late afternoon. Either I'd become completely turned around in the fog, or I didn't want to complete that thought. After another mile, the trail opened onto a perfect clearing, at the center of which stood a single massive pine tree. Its trunk must have been 6 feet in diameter, its lowest branches beginning 30 feet up. But what made me stop short was what hung from those branches. Dozens of the same stick figures I'd seen at Silver Lake, dangling like macabre ornaments. Standing beneath the tree was a woman. She was tall and gaunt, dressed in what appeared to be homespun clothes in earth tones that almost blended with the tree bark. Her hair, gray streaked with remnants of auburn, hung in a single braid to her waist. When she turned to face me, I saw that her eyes were milky white, blind, or at least appearing so. "Jacob Carter," she said, her voice the same humming tone I'd heard the past 2 nights. "You've been walking my boundaries." I hadn't told anyone on the trail my name. I hadn't seen another human since the old hiker the day before. "How do you know my name?" I managed to ask, my mouth dry with fear. She smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "The trees whispered it to me, just as they told me about the emptiness you carry, the hole where your marriage used to be." She took a step toward me. So much pain. So much potential. I backed away. "I'm just trying to get back to the trailhead. I took a wrong turn in the fog." "There are no wrong turns in my woods, Jacob. Only destinations you didn't know you were seeking." Another step closer. "You wanted solitude. You wanted to punish yourself by walking alone in the wilderness. But true isolation is much more profound than a few days away from cell service." My back hit a tree trunk. I hadn't realized I'd retreated so far. "What do you want?" I asked. "To offer you a choice." She was close enough now that I could smell her, earth and rotting leaves and something metallic, like old blood. "Stay with me. Learn what I know. The woods have power for those willing to pay its price." She reached out one long-fingered hand. "Or, go back to your empty life, your empty apartment, the silence of a phone that doesn't ring." For a moment, just a moment, I considered it. Not because I believed her offer, but because the emptiness she described was so real, so accurate, that it momentarily paralyzed me. "Who are you?" I whispered. "The locals have called me many things over the centuries. Witch, hag." She smiled again, those pointed teeth gleaming. "I prefer Helena. It was my name when I still walked among men." Movement caught my eye. The stick figures hanging from the tree were swaying, though there was no wind. The tiny animal skull heads all turned in unison to face me. "Those who stay with me are never really alone again," Helena said, following my gaze. "They keep me company. They serve. Some were lost hikers, like you. Others sought me out, drawn by rumors, by their own darkness." Her blind eyes somehow found mine. "You could join us. Your pain would end." I looked more closely at the figures and realized with horror that they weren't made of sticks at all, but of preserved human remains, desiccated and bound together, small enough that they could only be children, I gasped. The young ones serve best, Helena confirmed without a hint of remorse. So malleable, so full of potential energy. I felt sick. This couldn't be real. I had to be hallucinating from dehydration or altitude sickness. Maybe I'd fallen, hit my head, and this was some kind of twisted dream while I lay unconscious on the trail. But the bark pressing into my back felt real. The scent of pine and decay was real. The cold dread pooling in my stomach was real. I need to go, I said, trying to edge sideways around the tree. Helena's smile vanished. You misunderstand. This isn't a negotiation where you simply walk away. You stay and serve, or you stay and feed those who do. Her blind eyes filmed over with a black liquid that began to drip down her cheeks like tears. Choose! I ran. Crashing through the underbrush, abandoning the trail, I ran with the desperate energy of pure terror. Behind me came that humming sound, now a chorus of voices, rising and falling in patterns that made my skull vibrate painfully. The forest darkened around me as if night were falling in an instant. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and distort. My lungs burned and branches whipped at my face, drawing blood. I couldn't tell if I was being pursued or if the entire forest had become my enemy. Branches reaching for me, roots rising to trip me. When I finally collapsed, unable to run further, I found myself at the edge of a small meadow. In the center stood a familiar circle of white stones. Beyond it was the silhouette of what could only be Pyramid Peak, its distinctive shape unmistakable even in the gathering darkness. I knew where I was. Somehow, I'd circled back to within 2 miles of the main trail. If I could reach it before full dark, I might have a chance. As if in response to my hope, the humming began again, closer this time. I searched frantically for a weapon, finding only a hefty fallen branch. Better than nothing. I gripped it tightly, preparing for whatever emerged from the forest's edge. What stepped into the meadow wasn't Helena. It was the old hiker I'd met on the trail the day before. "Told you it's not good to be alone out here," he said, his voice no longer rough but smooth and cold. "Stay back," I warned, raising the branch. He smiled, the exact same pointed-tooth smile as Helena. "She sent me to find you. Said you were confused about your choices." "There's no choice," I said. "I'm leaving." "No one leaves," he replied simply. From his pocket, he withdrew something small that caught the last light of day. A polished stone arrowhead, its edges wickedly sharp. Not whole, anyway. He moved with shocking speed for someone his age, covering the distance between us in seconds. I swung the branch, connecting solidly with his shoulder, but he didn't even flinch. The arrowhead flashed toward my face. I jerked backward, feeling a line of fire across my cheek as it narrowly missed my eye. We grappled, falling to the ground. He was inhumanly strong, his fingers digging into my arms deep enough to touch bone. The pain was excruciating. I thrashed wildly, somehow breaking his grip enough to slam my elbow into his throat. He made an inhuman gurgling sound, and I struck again, harder, feeling something crack beneath the blow. The old man fell back, black liquid identical to Helena's tears oozing from his mouth. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the tree line in the direction of Pyramid Peak. Behind me, the humming rose to a shriek of rage that didn't sound at all human. Night had fallen completely by the time I reached what I believed was the main trail. I had no headlamp. It had been lost somewhere during my flight or fight with the old man. I could barely see the path in front of me, navigating more by feel than sight, my hands outstretched to prevent running face first into trees. The darkness was absolute, but I drove myself forward, terrified of stopping. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl, the crack of a distant branch, sent fresh jolts of adrenaline through my system. I was operating on pure survival instinct now. Hours passed. My legs moved mechanically, one foot in front of the other. I'd given up trying to verify I was still on the trail. I simply kept the silhouette of Pyramid Peak to my left, visible occasionally when the clouds parted to reveal stars and a sliver of moon. Just when I thought I could go no further, I saw it, a faint glow ahead that could only be artificial light. I stumbled toward it with renewed energy, half convinced it was another of Helena's tricks, but too desperate to care. I emerged from the forest to find myself at a park ranger station. Light spilled from its windows, and a National Park Service truck was parked outside, the same one I'd seen at the trailhead days earlier. I staggered to the door and pounded on it with the last of my strength. The ranger who opened it was young, probably not more than 25, with a neatly trimmed beard and startled eyes. "Jesus," he said, taking in my appearance. "What happened to you?" I tried to explain, but the words came out in an incoherent jumble. Lost, witch, children, circle of stones. None of it made sense even to me. The ranger, whose name tag read Martinez, helped me inside and sat me down. He gave me water, which I gulped greedily, and then examined the cut on my face and the deep bruises on my arms. "You need a hospital," he said. "Those wounds look infected and you're severely dehydrated." "What day is it?" I managed to ask. "Tuesday," he replied. "September 28th. 4 days. I'd been in the wilderness for 4 days, exactly as planned. It seemed impossible. As Martinez radioed for medical assistance, I found my voice enough to ask, "Do you know about a cabin out there, in the Desolation Valley area?" He frowned. "There are no authorized structures in the wilderness area. It's protected land. There's a woman, calls herself Helena, living there." Martinez's expression changed subtly. "Where exactly did you say you encountered this woman?" I described the location as best I could. "That's odd," he said slowly. "We had another hiker come in 2 weeks ago, similarly disoriented, talking about a cabin and a woman named Helena. He had to be airlifted out, severe lacerations, exposure, dehydration." "What happened to him?" I asked. Martinez hesitated. "He didn't make it. Died en route to the hospital. Infection had set in, some kind of toxin the doctors couldn't identify." He looked at the cut on my face with new concern. "It sounds crazy, but there are stories among the local tribes about that part of the valley. They called it the Witch's Garden. According to legend, a European woman settled there in the 1850s during the gold rush. She disappeared after several children from a nearby mining camp went missing." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with my physical condition. Martinez continued. "Most likely, you found an illegal squatter's cabin. We'll send a team to investigate tomorrow." I wanted to warn him not to go, that whatever waited in those woods wasn't just an illegal squatter, but exhaustion overtook me. The last thing I remember before passing out was Martinez saying something about my eyes, asking when they had started to turn white around the edges. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in South Lake Tahoe. The infection from the cut had nearly killed me, the doctors said. Whatever had caused it wasn't responding to standard antibiotics, and they'd had to try several experimental treatments before finding one that worked. When I was strong enough, 2 park rangers came to interview me, neither of them Martinez. They asked detailed questions about where I'd been, what I'd seen. When I asked about Martinez, they exchanged glances before telling me that Ranger Martinez had gone missing 2 days after bringing me in. He'd gone to investigate my claims about the cabin. They never found him. Nor did they find any cabin, or circles of stones, or stick figures in the search area. What they did find, just last week, was an old compass and Martinez's ranger hat, placed side by side in the center of a small clearing. I check out of the hospital tomorrow. The doctors say I've made a remarkable recovery, though they can't explain why my eye color seems to be gradually lightening, or why I sometimes hear a faint humming when no one else is around. I'm writing this as a warning. If you're planning to hike in Desolation Valley, stay on the main trails. Hike in groups. And if you find yourself suddenly alone in the fog, don't follow any path that appears too convenient, no matter how lost you are, because something waits in those woods. Something that knows your name before you speak it. Something that offers choices that aren't choices at all. and sometimes when the night is very still, I can hear it calling. My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Trinity Alps in Northern California just last summer. I've always considered myself an experienced hiker, someone who respects nature but isn't afraid of it. That confidence seems laughable to me now. I needed to get away. After my brother's funeral, the pitying looks and hushed conversations became too much to bear. Mark had been my only family, and his sudden death left me unmoored in a world that suddenly felt too loud, too intrusive. So I packed my gear, loaded up my German Shepherd, Luna, and headed to Desolation Creek Trail, a remote path that cuts through some of the most isolated terrain in the Trinity Alps wilderness. The drive took nearly 6 hours from San Francisco. As the landscape transformed from urban sprawl to scattered towns and finally to dense forest, I felt the vice grip of grief loosening slightly. Cell service disappeared about an hour before I reached the trailhead, which was exactly what I wanted. No more condolence texts. No more calls from well-meaning friends who couldn't possibly understand what I was going through. The Trinity Alps trailhead parking area was deserted when I arrived, save for a single mud-spattered pickup truck. The registration box contained only 2 entries from the past week, unusual even for this remote location, but a blessing for someone seeking solitude. I signed in, noting my intended route and expected return date 4 days later. Luna bounded from the car, her tail wagging with excitement. At least one of us was looking forward to this trip. I shouldered my pack, checked my map one last time, and started down the trail. The late afternoon sun filtered through the towering pines, casting long shadows across the path. According to my research, the hike to my first planned campsite at Emerald Lake was about 7 miles. Challenging but doable before nightfall if I kept a good pace. The first few miles passed pleasantly enough. The trail was well maintained, winding through old-growth forest and crossing several small streams. Luna trotted ahead, occasionally circling back as if to check on me. The physical exertion felt good, forcing my mind to focus on my breathing, my footing, the immediacy of the journey rather than the hollow ache that had become my constant companion. It was when we passed the junction to Mirror Lake that I first noticed something odd. Luna, normally fearless, stopped abruptly and refused to continue. Her ears flattened against her head, and a low growl rumbled in her chest. "What is it, girl?" I knelt beside her, scanning the surrounding forest. Nothing seemed amiss. Just trees, underbrush, the distant call of birds. Yet something had clearly spooked her. I chalked it up to wildlife, perhaps a bear or mountain lion had passed through recently, and coaxed her onward with gentle words and a treat from my pack. The trail grew steeper as we climbed. According to my map, we were entering a section known locally as the Devil's Corridor, a narrow passage between towering granite walls that led to the higher elevations. The name seemed melodramatic in the warm afternoon sun, but as we ventured deeper, the temperature dropped noticeably. The trees here were different too. Gnarled, stunted things that seemed to claw at the sky with arthritic fingers. I checked my watch, 5:30 p.m. We still had a couple of hours of daylight, but the shadows were lengthening quickly in this narrow passage. Luna had stayed unusually close since her earlier hesitation, sometimes pressing against my legs as we walked. It was as we emerged from the Devil's Corridor into a small meadow that I saw the first inexplicable thing. A hiking boot, a single men's boot, fairly new by the look of it, sat in the middle of the trail. Not cast aside or half-buried, but placed deliberately, as if its owner had been raptured mid-stride. I approached cautiously, calling out a hello in case someone was nearby, perhaps changing footwear. Only the whisper of wind through the pines answered me. I picked up the boot, turning it over in my hands. Size 11. A quality brand, no visible damage. No sock inside, no signs of animal interference, just an abandoned boot in pristine condition. A prickle of unease crept up my spine as I set it back down exactly as I'd found it. Luna sniffed it once and backed away, whining softly. "Just some careless hiker," I said aloud, more to comfort myself than inform Luna. But even as I said it, I knew it made no sense. No one accidentally leaves a single boot on a trail 7 miles from civilization. We pressed on, but my earlier ease had evaporated. I found myself scanning the trees more frequently, listening intently for sounds other than our footfalls and the natural chorus of the forest. The meadow gave way to another stretch of woods, these older and more densely packed than those we'd passed through earlier. The trail here was less distinct, forcing me to check my map and compass more frequently. It was nearing 7 p.m. when I realized we wouldn't make it to Emerald Lake before dark. I'd overestimated my pace or underestimated the difficulty of the terrain. Either way, I needed to find a suitable campsite soon. According to my map, there was a small clearing about a half-mile ahead near a tributary of Desolation Creek. Not ideal, but serviceable for one night. We reached the clearing just as dusk was settling in earnest. It was smaller than I'd hoped, but flat and near water, the two essentials. I quickly set up my tent while Luna patrolled the perimeter, her behavior still unusually vigilant. I worked efficiently, setting up my small backpacking stove to heat water for my dehydrated meal, hanging my food bag from a suitable tree branch, and filtering water from the nearby stream. As I went about these familiar tasks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Twice I spun around, certain I'd glimpsed movement at the edge of the clearing, but saw nothing definitive. Just shadows that seemed to shift independently of the breeze-stirred branches. I ate quickly, not really tasting the reconstituted pasta. Luna refused her kibble entirely, another anomaly that heightened my unease. She sat rigid, staring into the darkened forest with unwavering focus. "You're making me nervous, Luna," I told her, trying to keep my voice light. "It's just wildlife. We're in their territory, remember?" But her fixed gaze and tense posture did nothing to reassure me. I found myself speaking more than usual, filling the silence with one-sided conversation as I cleaned up and prepared for bed. The sound of my own voice was comforting, but it also made it harder to listen for sounds from the surrounding forest. I crawled into my tent around 9 p.m., Luna following reluctantly after a final patrol of our small camp. Inside, I zipped the tent securely and settled into my sleeping bag, using my bundled fleece as a pillow. Luna curled up beside me but remained alert, her eyes reflecting the beam of my headlamp as I made a few notes in my journal about the day's hike. I switched off the light, plunging the tent into darkness broken only by the faint silver of moonlight filtering through the nylon. Exhaustion from the day's hike tugged at me, but sleep remained elusive. Every sound seemed amplified. The rustle of leaves, the distant hooting of an owl, the soft gurgle of the stream. Normal forest sounds, I reminded myself. Nothing to fear. I must have drifted off eventually because the next thing I knew, Luna was growling, a deep, threatening sound I'd never heard from her before. I blinked awake, momentarily disoriented. The darkness in the tent was absolute now. The moon had either set or been obscured by clouds. "What is it, girl?" I whispered, fumbling for my headlamp. Luna's growl intensified. I could feel her trembling against me. Before I could locate my light, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling our tent. Not the four-footed tread of an animal, but the distinctive cadence of a human. Someone was out there, walking methodically around our campsite. My heart hammered in my chest as I finally grasped my headlamp and switched it on. Luna's eyes were fixed on the tent wall, tracking the movement outside. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the tent entrance. Then, a sound that turned my blood to ice. A low, rattling wheeze, like someone struggling to draw breath through fluid-filled lungs. It was followed by what I can only describe as a chuckle. Not of mirth, but of malice. A sound so divorced from joy it barely qualified as laughter. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" Silence. Complete, sudden silence. Even the ambient forest sounds had ceased, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I unzipped the tent with shaking hands, Luna pushing past me the moment the opening was wide enough. She shot into the darkness, barking ferociously. I scrambled after her, headlamp bobbing wildly as I emerged into the clearing. The beam of light revealed nothing unusual, no sign of an intruder. Luna was at the edge of the clearing, hackles raised, barking at the impenetrable wall of trees. I fumbled for my larger flashlight in the vestibule of my tent and swept its more powerful beam across the campsite and into the woods beyond. Nothing. No footprints in the soft earth around my tent. No disturbance to the gear I'd left outside, yet I'd heard it clearly. We both had. "Luna, come!" I called, my voice higher than normal. She returned reluctantly, still growling. I retreated to the tent, zipping it securely behind us. Sleep was out of the question now. I sat up for the remainder of the night, knife in one hand, bear spray in the other, listening to the oppressive silence outside. Dawn arrived with agonizing slowness. As the first gray light penetrated the tent walls, I emerged cautiously, surveying the campsite in the weak morning light. Everything was undisturbed. Even the layer of pine needles covering the ground showed no signs of footprints other than my own and Luna's paw prints. I should have packed up and returned to civilization immediately. Every instinct told me to flee. But in the rational light of day, I managed to convince myself that I'd experienced some sort of waking dream, a manifestation of grief and exhaustion. The mind plays tricks, especially in unfamiliar surroundings. Besides, turning back meant failure, and I'd promised myself this trip would be a testament to my resilience. So instead, I made coffee, forced down a breakfast bar, and studied my map. Emerald Lake was still my destination, just a few more hours of hiking. The isolation that had drawn me to this trail now seemed more threatening than therapeutic, but I was committed. One strange night didn't justify abandoning my plans. We set out around 8 a.m. Luna seemed to have recovered from the night's disturbance, trotting ahead with her usual enthusiasm. The forest in daylight was beautiful rather than menacing. Sunlight dappling the trail, wildflowers adding splashes of color to the green understory. I began to feel foolish about my fears. The trail ascended steadily as the morning progressed. According to my map, we were following Desolation Creek upstream toward its source at Emerald Lake. The creek itself was visible intermittently through the trees to our right, a silver ribbon winding through the landscape. Around midday, we stopped for lunch at a sun-drenched rock outcropping overlooking a particularly scenic stretch of the creek. I shed my pack with relief, stretching my sore shoulders as Luna explored the immediate area. The serenity of the spot further eroded my night terrors. This was why I'd come, to reconnect with nature, to find peace in its indifferent beauty. As I bit into my trail mix, something caught my eye. A flash of color in the creek below that didn't belong. I stood, moving closer to the edge of the outcropping for a better view. There, snagged on a fallen tree that spanned part of the water, was a red backpack. My appetite vanished. A backpack in this remote location could mean a fellow hiker was in trouble. I repacked hastily and picked my way down the steep slope to the creek's edge, Luna following cautiously behind. The backpack was half submerged, its contents likely soaked. I waded into the cold water, wincing at the temperature, and worked it free from the branches that held it. On the bank, I hesitated before opening it. This was someone's personal property, but if they were injured or lost, it might contain identification or clues to their whereabouts. The pack was surprisingly light. I unzipped the main compartment and found it empty save for a small notebook, its pages swollen with moisture but still intact. No wallet, no phone, no other gear one would expect from a hiker in this remote area, just the notebook. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Most of the ink had run, rendering the pages illegible, but a few entries near the beginning remained decipherable. The handwriting was jagged, urgent. Day 3. They're not natural. The sounds they make at night, God help me, I've barricaded myself at the lake cabin. Day 4. Footprints outside this morning. Not human, not animal either. The ranger station radio is dead. No one's coming. Day 5. Saw one of them today. It was wearing Jeff's face. But it wasn't Jeff. He's been dead for days. They're wearing us like the entry ended abruptly. The remaining pages were blank or too water-damaged to read. I dropped the notebook as if it had burned me, backing away from the ruined backpack. "This is crazy," I said aloud, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. Just someone's idea of a joke or a creative writing project. Or... Luna's sudden barking interrupted my rationalization. She was staring upriver, her posture alert but not aggressive. I followed her gaze and saw a figure standing on the opposite bank about 50 yards away, a man in what appeared to be a forest ranger's uniform. Relief flooded through me. A ranger, an authority figure, someone who could explain the abandoned boot, the mysterious backpack, the strange events of the previous night. I waved, calling out, "Hello, over here." The figure remained motionless for several seconds, then raised an arm in acknowledgement. He began making his way downstream toward a narrower section of the creek, presumably to cross over to my side. "Wait here," I told Luna, not wanting her enthusiasm to knock the ranger into the creek. She whined but stayed put as I walked upstream to meet him. As he drew closer, details emerged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a full beard and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. His uniform was standard-issue Forest Service olive green, though it appeared unusually dirty and disheveled. The name badge on his chest read Ranger Matthews. "Are you all right, miss?" he called as he reached the crossing point, a series of partially submerged rocks that formed a natural bridge. "This area isn't recommended for solo hikers." "I'm fine," I replied, relieved at the normality of the interaction. "But I found this backpack in the creek, and last night there was someone or something around my campsite, and earlier I found a single boot on the trail and—" He held up a hand, stopping my nervous babble. "Slow down, you're safe now. I've been patrolling this area because we've had some unusual reports lately." He carefully negotiated the rock crossing, his movements oddly stiff. When he reached my side of the creek, I noticed several disturbing details I hadn't observed from a distance. His uniform wasn't just dirty, it was caked with dried mud and what looked unsettlingly like blood. His face, while tanned, had an unhealthy grayish undertone, and his eyes were wrong somehow. Too fixed, too unblinking. "Have you been injured?" I asked, taking an involuntary step backward. "Nothing serious," he said, his voice flat despite the reassuring words. "Just a run-in with some deadfall a few days back. Now, you mentioned unusual experiences." Something about his manner set off alarm bells. Luna clearly felt it too. She'd begun growling softly from where I'd left her downstream. "Actually, I think I overreacted," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just first-time solo hiker jitters. I should get going if I want to reach Emerald Lake before dark." His expression didn't change, but his head tilted slightly, like a bird of prey assessing a potential meal. "Emerald Lake," he repeated. "That's not a good place to camp. Not now. There's been wildlife activity." "Oh? What kind of wildlife?" I was edging backward as I spoke, moving closer to Luna. "The dangerous kind." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "The hungry kind." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cool forest air. We were standing in broad daylight beside a gurgling creek, yet terror gripped me as powerfully as it had during the midnight visitation at my tent. "Thanks for the warning," I managed. "I'll be careful." His hand shot out, gripping my wrist with unexpected strength. "You should come with me to the ranger station. It's safer there. We can wait until the situation is contained." I tried to pull away, but his fingers might as well have been steel bands. "I really need to get going. My boyfriend is meeting me at Emerald Lake tomorrow. He's bringing a group. They'll be worried if I don't show up." The lie tumbled out automatically. A defensive instinct. Something flickered in those two still eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or disappointment. His grip loosened fractionally. A group, you say? How many? 6. All experienced backpackers. 2 of them are search and rescue volunteers. I elaborated on my fabrication, praying it sounded convincing. He released my wrist abruptly. I see. Well, in that case, I should continue my patrol. Be vigilant, miss. And if you see anything unusual, anything at all, don't investigate. Just get to your group as quickly as possible. I will. Thank you, Ranger Matthews. He nodded stiffly and turned away, recrossing the creek with the same awkward movements. I didn't wait to see which direction he took once on the other side. I hurried back to Luna, who was still growling, her eyes fixed on the retreating figure. Come on, girl, I whispered, gathering my gear and the disturbing notebook which I stuffed into my pack. We need to move. We returned to the main trail and set a brisk pace, my mind racing. The ranger's behavior had been off in ways I couldn't fully articulate. His uniform, his manner, his physical appearance, all slightly wrong, like a hastily assembled costume. And those eyes, I shuddered at the memory. The rational part of my brain suggested he might have been suffering from dehydration or exhaustion, conditions not uncommon in remote wilderness workers. But another part, a more primitive section dedicated to survival, screamed that I'd encountered something fundamentally not right. The trail grew steeper and rockier as we ascended toward Emerald Lake. The forest thinned, giving way to alpine meadows dotted with wildflowers. In another circumstance, I would have stopped to appreciate the beauty. Now, I was focused solely on putting distance between us and the unsettling ranger. It was late afternoon when we crested a ridge and finally saw Emerald Lake below us, a perfect oval of deep green water nestled in a natural amphitheater of gray granite. Even in my agitated state, its beauty wasn't lost on me. A small log cabin was visible on the far shore, presumably a ranger outpost or emergency shelter. The cabin. The notebook had mentioned a lake cabin. A chill that had nothing to do with the elevation crawled up my spine. We picked our way down the slope to the lakeshore. No other hikers were visible, though there were signs of recent human presence. A cleared fire ring, some cut wood stacked neatly beside it. The sun was still well above the western peaks. We had plenty of daylight left. I stood indecisively on the shore. The cabin drew my attention like a magnet. If the notebook's author had indeed taken refuge there, it might contain more information about what was happening in these woods. But approaching it meant potentially walking into the same danger they had faced. Luna made the decision for me. She trotted purposefully toward the cabin, pausing to look back as if impatient for me to follow. Her behavior had been a reliable warning system so far. If she was comfortable approaching the structure, perhaps it was safe. The cabin was more substantial than it had appeared from a distance. A proper ranger station with a metal roof, solid walls, and windows protected by heavy shutters. The door was ajar, moving slightly in the gentle breeze off the lake. A padlock hung broken from the hasp. "Hello?" I called, stopping several yards from the entrance. "Forest Service? Anyone there?" Only silence answered. Luna sniffed around the perimeter of the cabin, showing interest but no alarm. I approached cautiously, pushing the door fully open with the tip of my trekking pole. The interior was dim, but not dark, illuminated by the ambient light from the doorway and what filtered through the partially opened shutters. It was a simple space, a large main room with a desk, some chairs, a wood stove, and a few cabinets. A door in the back wall presumably led to additional rooms. The place had been ransacked, drawers pulled out and emptied, papers scattered across the floor, cabinets standing open. In the center of the chaos sat an old-fashioned radio unit, its casing smashed, wires protruding like the entrails of some mechanical creature. I stepped inside, scanning for any immediate threat. The air was stale but not unpleasant. No signs of violence or struggle, just the systematic destruction of equipment and the ransacking of files. A large map of the Trinity Alps wilderness was tacked to one wall, marked with various notations. Red X's were clustered in several areas, including the section of trail where I'd found the abandoned boot. Emerald Lake itself was circled repeatedly in thick red marker, the paper nearly worn through from the pressure. Beneath the map, someone had scrawled in the same red marker, "They're spreading." 11 confirmed. Quarantine zone established. My mouth went dry. Whatever was happening here went beyond a single rogue ranger or some backwoods psychopath. This suggested something larger, more organized, and officially acknowledged. I moved to the desk, rifling through the papers strewn across its surface. Most were standard Forest Service forms, trail maintenance logs, wildlife observation reports, weather data. But underneath was a folder labeled Incident Reports, classified. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were several typed reports, each bearing the Forest Service letterhead. I skimmed the top document, certain phrases leaping out at me. Unknown pathogen affecting wildlife and humans in the Desolation Creek watershed. Symptoms include aggressive behavior, physical deterioration, and apparent mimicry of unaffected individuals. All personnel to maintain quarantine protocols until CDC containment team arrives. Shoot on sight any individuals displaying symptoms. The date on the report was 3 weeks ago. If a CDC team had been dispatched, they should have arrived long before now, unless something had prevented them, unless the situation had deteriorated beyond containment. A sudden noise from the back room froze me in place, a soft thump like something heavy shifting position. Luna, who had been investigating the scattered papers, went rigid, her attention fixed on the closed door. "Is someone there?" I called. Clutching the report in my hand. "I'm not looking for trouble. I just need some information." Silence. Then, a sound that made my skin crawl, the same rattling wheeze I'd heard outside my tent the previous night. Luna erupted in furious barking, positioning herself between me and the door. I backed toward the cabin entrance, never taking my eyes off that closed door. It began to open, slowly, revealing darkness beyond. A hand emerged first, gray-skinned with blackened fingernails and swollen joints. It gripped the doorframe with unnatural strength, the wood creaking under the pressure. I didn't wait to see more. Clutching the report, I fled from the cabin, Luna right behind me. We sprinted across the clearing to the lake shore, where I frantically scanned for an escape route. The trail we'd descended would take us back toward the unsettling Ranger. The shoreline to our right appeared to curve around and eventually connect with another trail marked on my map that led to a different trailhead. It was longer, but potentially safer. A figure emerged from the cabin, the same Ranger I'd encountered at the creek, but his appearance had changed. The pretense of normality had been abandoned. His movements were jerky, puppet-like, his head lolling at an angle that suggested a broken neck. Behind him, another figure appeared in the doorway, this one so deteriorated I couldn't determine if it had once been male or female. Its clothes hung in tatters on a frame that seemed partially collapsed, as if the skeleton beneath was softening. "Should have. Come with me," the Ranger thing called, its voice guttural and wet. Could have been quick. I backed away along the shoreline, Luna snarling beside me. "Stay back." The creature that had once been Ranger Matthews took a lurching step forward. "No one's coming for you. No one's coming for any of us now." His face split in a grin that was too wide, revealing teeth that had begun to blacken at the gums. "But we're so hungry." I turned and ran, following the lakeshore as it curved away from the cabin. Luna loped beside me, occasionally looking back and growling. I didn't dare look behind us, focusing instead on the uneven ground, on maintaining my footing as we fled. The shoreline trail was barely more than a game path, forcing me to slow to avoid turning an ankle. I glanced back once to see the Ranger thing and its companion following at a steady pace, not running, but moving, with the relentless persistence of creatures that didn't tire, didn't need to rest. As the trail rounded the lake's far side, a new sound reached me. Voices. Human voices. My heart leapt with hope, only to plummet as I realized I might be leading these creatures directly to other unsuspecting hikers. I hesitated, torn between seeking help and not endangering others. Luna made a decision for me, darting ahead toward the voices. I followed, reasoning that warning them was better than leaving them to be ambushed unawares. We rounded a bend in the shore to find a campsite with 2 tents and 4 people, 3 men and a woman, gathered around a small cooking stove. They looked up in surprise as Luna bounded into their camp, me close behind. "Hey there," one of the men called, his tone friendly but cautious. He was tall and lean, with a red beard and wire-rimmed glasses. "Everything okay?" "We need to leave," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "All of us. Right now. There's something. There are people. They're not right. They're dangerous." The 4 exchanged glances. The woman stepped forward, her expression concerned. She was in her mid-30s, athletic-looking, with short dark hair and a no-nonsense manner. "Slow down. What exactly did you see?" Before I could formulate a coherent explanation, Luna began barking again, facing back the way we'd come. I turned to see the ranger thing emerge from around the bend, moving with that same awful, jerky gait. The more deteriorated creature followed close behind, and now I could see 2 more figures behind them, all in various states of decay, all moving with the same unsettling wrongness. "Holy shit," one of the men breathed. "What the hell is wrong with them?" "I don't know," I said, thrusting the report I'd taken from the cabin toward the woman, who seemed to be the group's leader. "But according to this, it's some kind of pathogen. It's affecting people and wildlife in this area. There's supposed to be a quarantine." She scanned the document quickly, her expression hardening. "Mitchell, you were a medic. What does this sound like to you?" The youngest man in the group, who had remained silent until now, shook his head. "Nothing I've ever seen or heard of. But if it's a pathogen, we need to avoid physical contact at all costs." "Grab what you can, quickly," the woman ordered. "We're leaving. Now." The group moved with practiced efficiency, stuffing essential items into their packs while casting nervous glances at the approaching figures, which had now reached the edge of their campsite. Luna continued barking, keeping them temporarily at bay. "I'm Diane," the woman said as she worked. "That's Mitchell, Eric, and Paul. We're with Shasta Mountain Rescue. We were actually up here looking for a ranger who missed his check-in 3 days ago." "Matthews?" I asked. Her eyes widened. "Yes. How did you—" "That's him," I said, pointing to the lead figure, which had stopped about 30 feet from our position, swaying slightly. "Or what's left of him." Diane's face paled. "Jesus Christ." She raised her voice, addressing the creature directly. "Jim? Jim Matthews? Can you understand me?" The thing that had once been Ranger Matthews cocked its head, regarding her with those unnaturally still eyes. "Diane?" The voice was a grotesque parody of human speech. "You came. Good. So, hungry now." It took a shambling step forward. The others behind it followed suit. "Don't come any closer," Diane warned, drawing a large hunting knife from her belt. The others in her group were similarly arming themselves, one with an axe, another unslinging what looked like a hunting rifle from his pack. The Matthews thing paused, eyeing the weapons. Then, with shocking speed, it lunged forward, not toward Diane, but toward Mitchell, the youngest and smallest of the group. Its hand closed around his arm before he could react. Mitchell screamed, not in fear, but in pain. Where the creature's fingers gripped him, his skin immediately began to blacken, as if necrosis was spreading from the point of contact. He tried to pull away, but the grip was unbreakable. The man with the rifle fired, the shot deafening in the mountain air. The bullet struck the Matthews thing squarely in the chest. It stumbled backward, releasing Mitchell, who collapsed to his knees, clutching his discolored arm in agony. The creature looked down at the neat hole in its uniform, from which not blood but a thick blackish fluid was oozing. It raised its head, fixing the shooter with those terrible eyes. That hurt. Its voice held a note of surprise, as if pain was a novel and not entirely unpleasant sensation. "Run!" Diane shouted, dragging Mitchell to his feet. "To the boats!" Only then did I notice 2 kayaks pulled up on the shore nearby. The group had apparently paddled across the lake rather than hiking in, but there were only 2 crafts for 5 people now. "Mitchell and Paul, take the first kayak," Diane ordered. "Jessica, you and Eric take the second. I'll keep them back and follow along the shore." She had taken the rifle from Paul and was now aiming it steadily at the advancing creatures. "No, I can run," I protested. "You take the kayak." "Not negotiable," she snapped. "I know these mountains better than any of you. Now move." The authority in her voice brooked no argument. Paul was already helping Mitchell, whose arm now hung uselessly at his side, into one of the kayaks. Eric grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the second craft. Luna hesitated, unwilling to leave me but clearly understanding we were fleeing. "She can swim, right?" Eric asked, indicating Luna. "Yes, but then she'll follow us across. Hurry." We pushed the kayak into the water, Eric taking the rear position with the paddle while I crouched awkwardly in the front. Luna plunged into the lake beside us, a strong swimmer despite her obvious distress. Behind us, Diane fired twice more, the shots echoing across the water. "Go!" she yelled. "I'll meet you at the North Shore boat launch." The last I saw of her, she was backing away from the advancing creatures, the rifle held steadily before her. Then we rounded a small peninsula, and she was lost from view. The journey across the lake was a nightmare of adrenaline and fear. Eric paddled with desperate strength, while I crouched low, occasionally glancing back to ensure Luna was still swimming steadily beside us. The lake, which had seemed so pristine and beautiful earlier, now felt like a vast, exposed vulnerability. I kept expecting to see those shambling figures somehow walking across the surface in pursuit, defying natural law as they seemed to defy biology. The other kayak, with Paul and the injured Mitchell, was about 50 yards ahead of us. Mitchell appeared to be slumped forward, unmoving. Paul was paddling frantically. "Something's wrong with Mitchell," I said to Eric, pointing. Eric redoubled his efforts, quickly closing the distance between our crafts. As we drew alongside, I could see that Mitchell was indeed in a bad way. His entire arm was now black to the shoulder, and the discoloration was visibly spreading across his chest. His breathing was labored, his eyes unfocused. "He's getting worse," Paul said, his voice tight with fear. "I don't know what to do." "Keep going," Eric replied grimly. "We need to get him to medical help." "But what if—" Paul couldn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. What if Mitchell became like the others? "One problem at a time," Eric said. "The boat launch is just ahead." Indeed, I could now make out a small wooden dock on the approaching shoreline. Beyond it, a gravel path led upward through the trees, presumably to a parking area or trailhead. We reached the dock minutes later, Eric jumping out to secure our kayak while Paul struggled to support Mitchell, who was now barely conscious. Luna had swum the entire distance and now stood on the shore, shaking water from her coat and watching the far side of the lake with obvious anxiety. "Help me get him up to level ground," Paul grunted, attempting to lift Mitchell from the kayak. Eric moved to assist, but hesitated upon seeing Mitchell's condition up close. The blackness had spread across most of his chest now and was creeping up his neck. His breathing had become the same rattling wheeze I'd heard from the creatures. His eyes, when they briefly focused on us, held an unsettling vacancy. "Don't touch his skin," I warned, remembering how the infection had spread through direct contact. "Use the emergency blanket from your pack to create a stretcher." The men worked quickly, wrapping Mitchell in the reflective material without directly touching his affected areas. Together, they managed to lift him onto the shore and up the gravel path to a small clearing where several vehicles were parked, their own SUV and another car that must have belonged to the Rangers. "Where's the nearest hospital?" I asked, scanning the tree line for any sign of Diane. Luna remained tense, occasionally emitting low growls toward the lake. "Weaverville," Eric replied, opening their vehicle and carefully laying Mitchell across the back seat. "But that's over an hour away on these mountain roads." He glanced at Mitchell, whose condition was deteriorating visibly. "I don't think he has that long." "The ranger station at the main trailhead might have a satellite phone or radio," Paul suggested. "We could call for a medical evacuation." "If it hasn't been compromised like the one at the lake," I said. The memory of those documents was still vivid. A quarantine zone had been established. What if we were already inside it? What if there was no help coming? A noise from the lakeside trail made us all turn. Luna barked sharply, then fell silent, her tail wagging tentatively. A moment later, Diane emerged from the trees, sprinting toward us. She was alone and appeared uninjured, though her face was drawn with exhaustion. "They can't swim," she gasped as she reached us. "Thank God for small mercies. Is Mitchell—" "Alive, but barely," Paul said. "We need to get him to a hospital." Diane shook her head. "Not a hospital. The CDC report Jessica found mentioned a containment team. They'll have a field unit set up somewhere nearby." She pulled out her satellite phone. "I'm going to call our base and see what they know about official operations in the area." While she made the call, I checked on Mitchell. The transformation was accelerating. His fingers were now elongating, the joints swelling grotesquely. His eyes, when they opened, flickered between awareness and something altogether different, something hungry and alien. I took an involuntary step back. "This is Diane Morales, Shasta Mountain Rescue," she was saying into the phone. "We have a situation at Emerald Lake in the Trinity Alps wilderness, medical emergency and possible pathogenic outbreak." She paused, listening. "Yes, that's right. We found Ranger Matthews, but he's infected with something. It's affected several others. And now, one of my team." Another pause. "Understood. We'll head there immediately." She ended the call and turned to us, her expression grave. "There's a CDC checkpoint on Highway 3, just south of the Trinity Center. They've established a quarantine perimeter and are processing survivors. We need to get Mitchell there immediately." "What about the others at the lake?" Eric asked. "Shouldn't we warn any other hikers in the area?" "The Trinity Alps wilderness has been officially closed for the past week," Diane said, her voice tight. "All entry points were supposed to be barricaded and staffed. I don't know how Jessica got in, but—" "There was no barricade at the Desolation Creek trailhead," I interrupted. "Just a normal trail register. If the area was closed, someone failed to secure that entrance." Diane's expression darkened. "That might explain why the situation hasn't been contained. We need to report this." She glanced at Mitchell, who had begun making the same horrible wheezing sound as the creatures at the lake. "But first, we need to move. Now." She took the driver's seat of their SUV, while Paul rode in the back with Mitchell, maintaining a careful distance from his infected teammate. Eric turned to me. "You and Luna can ride with me in Matthew's Ranger truck," he said, holding up a set of keys he must have taken from the cabin. "I don't think he'll be needing it anymore." I nodded gratefully, too exhausted to argue. Luna and I climbed into the passenger side of the Ranger's pickup, which smelled faintly of pine and something less pleasant, a subtle decay that made my stomach turn. As we pulled away from the lake, following the rough Forest Service road that wound down from the mountains, I finally had a moment to process what had happened. The strange encounters, the ranger station documents, the horrifying transformation of Mitchell. It all pointed to something beyond normal understanding. A pathogen that didn't just kill, but changed its victims. Turned them into vessels for, what? Spread? Consumption? "Those things back there," Eric said, breaking the silence. "They were once people, weren't they? Not just Matthews, but all of them." "I think so," I replied, stroking Luna's head as she leaned against me, still alert despite her exhaustion. The notebook I found mentioned someone named Jeff who died but was still walking around, and there were supposed to be 11 confirmed cases 3 weeks ago, according to the report I found. Who knows how many there are now? Eric's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. And Mitchell, is that what's happening to him? I didn't answer. We both knew the truth. The Forest Service road connected to a slightly better maintained county road after several miles. The SUV ahead maintained a steady pace, fast but not reckless given the conditions. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, creating a deceptively peaceful scene that belied the horror we'd left behind, and the horror we were bringing with us. We had been driving for perhaps 20 minutes when Diane suddenly braked, the SUV skidding slightly on the gravel. Eric cursed, bringing the truck to a halt just behind them. Ahead, the road was blocked by a fallen tree, a massive pine that spanned the entire width. "This wasn't here when we drove up yesterday," Eric said, frowning. "There wasn't any storm." An uneasy feeling crept over me. Luna sensed it too, growing tense beside me. "Could it have been cut down deliberately?" I asked. "Maybe, but why would—" A movement in the trees to our left cut him off. Something was there, just beyond the first line of pines. Then another movement to the right, and another. Dark figures emerging from the forest, moving with that same awful, jerky gait we'd seen at the lake. But these weren't the same creatures. These were new, different people who had succumbed to the infection. A woman in hiking clothes, her skin gray and mottled. A man in a flannel shirt, missing most of his lower jaw. A child, a child, no more than 10 years old, moving with the predatory grace of a hunting cat despite the visible decay of his small body. "There are more of them," I whispered, horror closing my throat. "A lot more." Eric reached under the seat and produced a large hunting knife, the ranger's presumably. "Get down," he ordered, opening his door. "I'm going to help Diane and Paul." "Are you crazy?" I grabbed his arm. "You can't fight those things. You saw what happened to Mitchell from just a single touch." He hesitated, then closed the door. "You're right. We need to find another way out." In the SUV ahead, I could see Diane on her satellite phone again, gesturing urgently. Paul was visible in the back seat, pressing himself against the far door, away from Mitchell, who appeared to be convulsing. The infected were closing in, moving toward both vehicles with single-minded purpose. I counted at least 15 distinct figures with more shapes moving among the trees beyond. "We need to back up," I said. "Get back to the lake, maybe find another road out." Eric nodded, shifting into reverse. He honked once, signaling Diane. The SUV's reverse lights came on immediately. She had clearly reached the same conclusion. We began a careful backward retreat, the vehicles maintaining a steady pace despite the challenging conditions. The infected pursued, but they couldn't match our speed, even in reverse on the rough road. Within minutes they had fallen behind, visible only as distant, lurching figures in the trail of dust our vehicles raised. "That tree didn't fall," Eric said grimly as we continued our retreat. "It was placed there. They're coordinating, hurting us." The realization chilled me. These weren't mindless zombies from horror movies. Whatever the infection did, it left enough intelligence for strategic thinking, coordinated hunting. The implications were terrifying. "There's a junction about 3 miles back," Eric continued. "It connects to an old logging road that eventually reaches Highway 3 from the north. It's rough going, but the SUV and this truck can handle it." When we reached the junction, Diane pulled over briefly for a hurried conference through the vehicle's windows. "Mitchell's getting worse," she reported, her face drawn with strain. "He's stopped responding to us entirely, and he's changing, physically changing." "We saw more infected back there," I told her, "at least 15. They're working together, blocking the road." She nodded. "The CDC officer I spoke with said the pathogen affects neurological systems in ways they don't fully understand yet. The victims retain some cognitive function, enough to work together. They've been systematically isolating and picking off rescue teams and rangers for the past week." "What about this logging road?" Eric asked. "Will it get us to the checkpoint?" "Eventually," Diane confirmed. "But it's a hard drive, especially in the dark. We need to move quickly before we lose daylight entirely." The logging road was everything Diane had warned us about. Rutted, overgrown in places, with steep switchbacks that tested both vehicles' capabilities. We drove in tense silence, the fading light casting long shadows through the trees. Luna had finally succumbed to exhaustion, dozing fitfully beside me, occasionally whimpering in her sleep. "We should reach the highway in about an hour," Eric said as we navigated a particularly challenging section, "assuming nothing else blocks our way." The something else happened 20 minutes later. The SUV ahead of us suddenly swerved, then slid to one side, the rear wheels dropping into a concealed washout at the road's edge. Despite Diane's skilled driving, the vehicle was hopelessly stuck, its frame grounded on the road's center while the wheels spun uselessly. We pulled up behind them, and Eric immediately went to help. I followed with Luna, keeping a watchful eye on the surrounding forest. The deepening twilight transformed the woods into a labyrinth of shadow and suggestion, where every tree could conceal a lurking threat. "The axle's bent," Diane declared after a brief inspection. "We're not getting it out without a winch and some serious equipment." "What about Mitchell?" I asked, noticing that the back door of the SUV was now secured with what looked like a luggage strap wrapped around the handle. Paul answered, his voice hollow. "He's gone. Or at least, the Mitchell we knew is gone. We had to restrain him when he tried to attack me." A thump from inside the vehicle punctuated his words. Mitchell, or what had once been Mitchell, throwing himself against the window. The glass, designed to withstand significant impact, held firm, but the sight of his transformed face pressed against it made my stomach lurch. His features had distorted, the jaw elongated, the eyes sunken yet somehow glowing with an inner light that spoke of nothing human. "We need to leave him," Diane said, her voice cracking slightly despite her obvious attempt at professional detachment. "The truck is our only option now." "There's not room for all of us and the dog in the cab," Paul pointed out. "I'll ride in the bed," Diane said immediately. "I've got the rifle. I can keep watch as we drive." No one argued. We transferred their essential gear to the Ranger's truck, and Diane climbed into the truck bed with the rifle. Paul took the passenger seat, with Luna crouched in the tight space at his feet. I squeezed into the middle, and Eric returned to the driver's position. As we pulled away, I glanced back at the SUV. Mitchell's transformed face was still pressed against the window, those terrible eyes tracking our movement with predatory focus. I wondered how long the windows would hold, and what would happen when he finally broke free. How many more would he infect before the CDC could contain this outbreak? The remaining drive was a tense blur of deepening darkness and startling sounds from the surrounding forest. Twice, Diane pounded on the roof, signaling Eric to speed up as she spotted figures moving among the trees. The logging road grew marginally better as we descended, eventually connecting with what appeared to be a more regularly used Forest Service road. "Highway should be just ahead," Eric said, his voice tight with exhaustion. We had been driving for nearly 3 hours since leaving the lake, the indirect route and challenging conditions slowing our progress considerably. The headlights suddenly illuminated a barricade across the road, but this one was official. Orange reflective barriers, flashing lights, and armed personnel in what looked like hazmat suits. We had reached the CDC checkpoint. Diane stood up in the truck bed, waving her arms and identifying herself as we approached. The personnel responded immediately, moving the barriers aside just enough to let our vehicle through before resealing the perimeter. What followed was a whirlwind of contained chaos. We were separated and processed through a series of decontamination procedures. Luna was taken to a separate veterinary station, despite my protests. I was stripped, scrubbed, examined, and given a series of injections that the medical staff assured me were prophylactic treatments against the pathogen. Through it all, I was questioned repeatedly about what I had seen and experienced. I described everything: the abandoned boot, the strange ranger, the cabin, the infected attackers at the lake, Mitchell's transformation. My audience grew from a single doctor to a room of solemn-faced officials in various uniforms as my debriefing continued. "You're extremely lucky," one of them told me when I had finished. He was an older man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. His ID badge identified him as Dr. Westmore, CDC Special Pathogens Branch. "The Trinity Alps outbreak is the most aggressive form of this pathogen we've encountered." "You mean there have been others?" I asked, stunned. He hesitated, then nodded. "Isolated incidents, primarily in remote wilderness areas across the Pacific Northwest. This is the first cluster that's reached this level of communication and coordination among the infected." "What is it?" I pressed. "Where did it come from?" "We're still determining that," he replied carefully. "Initial analysis suggests it's a previously unknown fungal-bacterial hybrid organism that affects neural pathways and can rewrite cellular structures with unprecedented speed. As for its origin..." He trailed off, his expression troubled. "Doctor," another official interrupted, "the perimeter team is reporting movement in Section 8. Multiple contacts." Dr. Westmore's face hardened. "Increase the guard rotation and authorize lethal force if necessary. We cannot allow any infected to breach containment." He turned back to me. "Ms. Davis, you'll be transported to our secure facility in Sacramento for further observation and treatment. Standard quarantine protocol is 21 days. What about my dog and the others, Diane, Eric, Paul?" "The animal will be quarantined separately. Rabies vector protocols," he explained. "Your fellow survivors are already en route to the facility. They'll be under observation as well." I wanted to argue about Luna, but exhaustion was finally overtaking me. The adrenaline that had sustained me for hours was ebbing, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made it difficult to form coherent thoughts. As if sensing this, Dr. Westmore softened slightly. "Get some rest, Ms. Davis. You're safe now. We'll talk more once you've had time to recover." I was escorted to a temporary quarters, little more than a cot in a partitioned section of what appeared to be a large command tent. Despite my anxiety about Luna and the others, sleep claimed me almost immediately. My dreams were chaotic and terrifying, pursued through endless forest by creatures that wore familiar faces yet moved with alien purpose. I was back at the lake, but this time it was filled not with water but with a writhing mass of infected, their arms reaching upward, beckoning me to join them. I saw Mark, my dead brother, standing among the shambling horde, his eyes holding that same hungry emptiness I'd seen in the ranger's gaze. I awoke, gasping, drenched in sweat despite the cool air. For a moment, I didn't know where I was, panic gripping me as I tried to orient myself in the unfamiliar space. Then reality slowly reasserted itself. The CDC checkpoint, the quarantine, safety. The partition curtain moved, and a medical technician entered, carrying monitoring equipment. "Good morning, Ms. Davis. Just need to check your vitals." I submitted to the examination, too drained to protest. "What time is it?" I asked as he wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm. "Just after 6 a.m., he replied. "You've been asleep for about 8 hours. Any news about my dog or the others from my group?" He shook his head. "I don't have that information. Dr. Westmore will brief you after your medical evaluation." The evaluation was thorough. Blood draws, skin samples, neurological tests, detailed questions about my physical condition and any symptoms I might be experiencing. I answered mechanically, my mind elsewhere. Despite the assurances of safety, a persistent dread lingered, a feeling that the horror of Desolation Creek wasn't behind me yet. Dr. Westmore arrived as the examination was concluding. He looked even more tired than he had the previous night, with new lines of strain around his eyes. "Ms. Davis," he greeted me, "I'm glad to see you're doing well. Your preliminary tests show no signs of infection." "What about Luna, my dog?" "Also clear, as far as we can determine. The pathogen appears to specifically target human neural structures, though we're maintaining quarantine protocols with all potentially exposed animals as a precaution." Relief flooded through me. "And the others? Diane, Eric, Paul?" His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ms. Morales and Mr. Kohler are showing no signs of infection. Mr. Stevens, however—" My heart sank. "Paul? But he didn't have any direct contact with the infected. Mitchell never touched him." "The pathogen's transmission vectors aren't fully understood yet," Westmore said carefully. "It's possible that prolonged proximity in an enclosed space, the vehicle, was sufficient for transmission through respiration." "Is he—" I couldn't finish the question. "He's in the early stages. We've isolated him and are attempting experimental treatments, but I have to be honest, the prognosis isn't good once symptoms manifest." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. Paul, who had helped carry Mitchell to safety, who had maintained his composure throughout our harrowing escape, was now facing the same terrible fate. "There's something else you should know," Westmore continued after a moment. "The Ranger's vehicle you escaped in had a dashboard camera. We've reviewed the footage from your journey, and there's something concerning about what we saw." He produced a tablet and tapped the screen, bringing up a video. It showed the road ahead from the perspective of the truck's dashboard, the familiar Forest Service road we'd traveled. He advanced to a specific timestamp and pointed to a dark shape just visible at the edge of the frame, where the headlights barely reached. "This figure appears multiple times during your drive, always just at the perimeter of visibility. We've enhanced the image as much as possible." He zoomed in on the shape, and despite the graininess, I could make out a human silhouette. But there was something wrong about its proportions. The arms too long, the head oddly shaped. As I stared, trying to make sense of the image, the figure seemed to turn directly toward the camera, revealing eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. "That's not one of the infected we saw," I said, a chill running through me. "They were decaying, shambling. This is something else." Westmore nodded grimly. "We believe this may be an evolved form of the pathogen, a more advanced stage of infection that retains greater mobility and possibly higher cognitive function. A pack leader, if you will." "That thing was following us? All the way to the checkpoint?" "Yes, and it wasn't alone." He swiped to another enhanced image, this one showing multiple reflective eyes in the darkness beyond the road. "We believe they were tracking you, possibly coordinating the movements of the less advanced infected to herd you in a specific direction." "But why? If they can think, can plan, why not just ambush us directly?" Westmore's expression grew troubled. "That's what worries us. It suggests a level of strategic thinking we haven't observed before. They weren't just hunting you, they were studying you, learning your capabilities, perhaps even testing our perimeter defenses by driving you toward us." The implications were horrifying. "You think they wanted us to lead them to the checkpoint? To find a way through your quarantine?" "It's a possibility we have to consider," he admitted, "which is why we're accelerating your transfer to the Sacramento facility. The helicopter will be ready in 30 minutes. "What about Luna? I'm not leaving without her." "The animal will be transported separately," he began, but something in my expression must have convinced him not to argue. "I'll see what I can arrange." As promised, a helicopter arrived shortly thereafter. Luna was brought to me just before boarding, sedated but otherwise appearing unharmed. I held her close as we were loaded onto the aircraft, relieved beyond words to have her with me. Diane and Eric were already aboard, both looking as exhausted as I felt. No words were necessary as I took a seat beside them. We had survived something beyond normal understanding, and that shared experience created a bond that transcended conventional interaction. As the helicopter lifted off, I gazed down at the CDC checkpoint. The perimeter had been reinforced overnight with additional barriers and more armed personnel. In the morning light, it looked almost like a military base rather than a medical facility, a fortress against an invisible enemy. Beyond the checkpoint, The dense forest of the Trinity Alps stretched to the horizon, beautiful and serene from this height. Somewhere within that vast wilderness, the infection was spreading, evolving, learning. How many more hikers would stumble into its domain before the area could be truly secured? How many rangers or rescue personnel would fall victim to its touch before a treatment was found? I stroked Luna's sedated form, taking comfort in her steady breathing. We had escaped, but the nightmare wasn't over. Not for Paul, not for the sealed-off wilderness behind us, and perhaps not for any of us who had encountered the horror at Desolation Creek. Some infections, I was beginning to understand, change you in ways that can never be undone, even if the physical symptoms never manifest. As the helicopter banked southward toward Sacramento, I closed my eyes, trying to block out the memory of those hungry, inhuman gazes. But behind my eyelids, they waited still, patient, calculating, evolving. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a terrible certainty was growing. The quarantine would not hold. The hunger would spread. And when it did, the world would learn the true meaning of desolation.